I see it on emails all the time, but not on Zoom. This is a first.
Well, I'm happy to be a trailblazer.
So, Sean, tell me, what are your pronouns?
He.
Okay, I'm thinking of us, Your Majesty, Your Highness. I don't know how to fit all of those on. Steve at Wits, has that become a common occurrence?
We do have gender neutral bathrooms now, and I am seeing it more and more in the academic world.
I must say, I don't have a problem with gender neutral bathrooms as long as there's a place with a urinal, because to expect a man to go and touch a toilet seat to lift it up is just cruel and inhumane.
I know it's really hard what we sometimes have to ask men to do in this world.
And I see Kim Kerr has joined us as well. Ellie, you don't know, but Kim has been running a project in South Africa since COVID began to try get South Africans who've been stuck overseas back to South Africa. And she's now been running a project to look after South Africans who've been stuck in the Ukraine, to get them to border posts. And she's been absolutely invaluable. She's one of the great treasures of our community and of South Africa in the selfless work that she's been doing. Hello, Kim. Thanks for joining us again. Oh, she just froze.
Thanks, Howard. My God, you're like my biggest fan.
I am your biggest fan, and actually there is competition because your mother messages me regularly to tell me that I must have you on one of our webinars.
Oh, thanks, Howard.
So, Kim, I'm going to ask you, your quality of your internet connection is not terribly good. I don't know if anyone in your home is busy streaming videos or anything like that, but can you try to boot them off your internet?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my phone. So I'll have my own connection.
Okay, cool.
So does it sound okay with this?
Yeah, that's much better.
I've got another set of earphones, so much better.
Okay, fantastic. You're looking very pale though, Steve.
I've got a light at the back, so I don't know if it's...
Yeah,
I don't get out much.
I was in Madikwe this week. I was in the game reserve, Ellie, that's in north of the country on the Botswana border, and I was watching
Howie, listen to me. Where do you think I come from?
Where do you come from?
Can't you hear?
Yeah, I was born in Johannesburg. I left when I was 14 and moved to Sydney, and now I'm in New York.
Oh, okay, that would explain
I know where the game reserve is.
And
okay,
I was with her on Nachum Goldman in Poland in 2012.
Okay, so, well, Ellie, you will know, Madikwe on the Botswana border.
Got it,
cheetah and lion cubs and wild dog and elephants crawling out of dams. It was just, and that's why I'm looking so bronzed and tanned and semi-relaxed.
You know, summertime.
It's summertime. So how long have you been in New York?
I've been in the US for 8 years, for almost 10 years, and I've been in New York for 8.
And now the JDC is what I would refer to in, maybe I'm showing my age, as the joint.
The joint. So internationally, we go by the joint. And if you think more South Africans will recognize us by the joint, I will use that terminology throughout.
Look, now that we've legalized weed, a lot of South Africans may just go have a joint.
Listen, if that's what people need to get through the neck, no judgment here.
Kim, when was the last time you had a decent night's sleep?
Yes. What is that word you use? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. But it must have been a harrowing few days.
It has been. Remember, I still work all day. So, and I have children and I have a family. So a lot of this gets done at night. Meetings, I think I was on the phone last night till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning.
I mean, you're going to be telling us some unbelievably harrowing stories of what you've been going through over the last few days. Your honey's joining us. Rebbetzin Rochi Levitansky, we're hoping will join us. She's currently fleeing. She's on the run. She's in a car. She doesn't know if she will have internet connectivity, but they're traveling and they're trying to get out of there. So hopefully we've said to her, if she joins us, we're going to cut away from everything and give her priority because you may only have a minute or two once she joins us to be able to do that. What we're going to be doing tonight, and Ellie, I presume you haven't seen any of the webinars we've run. This is our 133rd webinar we've run since lockdown began in South Africa nearly 2 years ago. We've been watched about 2.5 million times in the webinars. We've done a lot of storytelling. We've done things about mental health. We've done psychologists on COVID. We've done medical doctors on COVID. We've told the stories of South African Mossad spies, of the rescue of Ethiopian Jewry. We've really done a lot. Britt, I'm sure you're listening to us. Please, could you send Johan the link as well? He seems to have mislaid it. Please send it to him via WhatsApp and via email. Britt, are you with us?
I'll do it now.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. So Alice, I was just telling Ellie, and I'm sure, do you guys know each other? You work in similar fields?
We don't know each other, but Alice, it's always, we at JDC and World Jewish Relief are very strong long-term partners. So always good to have a colleague on the same Zoom.
Yeah, great to meet you. Sorry, a few minutes late. We were just talking to colleagues in Zaporizhia and only just got off with them.
Okay, cool. So what I was just saying to Ellie, we've run 133 webinars since lockdown began on behalf of the South African Jewish Report. I'm non-executive chairman. Sean is one of my fellow board members for his multiple sins. He gets punished in that way. We've been watched about 2.5 million times with very large audiences in places like Canada and the United States and England and Israel, lots of South African expatriates, but we also watched in places like the UAE and the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Sri Lanka and Panama and Brazil. So we really have a global audience. And what we've been trying to do is just make sure that people are educated, informed and inspired during what has been really a very difficult 2 years. And I think the last week, 8 days, Steve, how many days has it been since the war began? 7 days, 24th of February. It's really been a very harrowing time. So what we're going to do as everyone else joins us, I'm going to ask you all just to turn off your cameras for a moment. We've got a 10-minute kind of background information that as people join the Zoom, and there are thousands and thousands of people who will be watching us tonight, we're just kind of going to show a brief background of some information about what is happening, the history behind it. So Kim, if you can turn off your camera for a second. I think Kim has frozen. Okay, thanks, Kim. So we're going to be back in about 10 minutes, but in the interim, this is probably the best 10-minute video that I found that describes what's happening in the conflict.
Will Russia go to war with Ukraine? All week, you've heard numerous answers to this question. In Ukraine, 71% of the people believe their country is already at war with Russia. This is a complex crisis, and all the answers are hidden in history. Did you know there was a time when Kiev was more powerful than Moscow? There was also a time when Ukraine and America were adversaries. Tonight, we'll bring you all these stories. We will tell you why Russian President Vladimir Putin is obsessed with Ukraine. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and this is Gravitas Plus. We begin in the 9th century. There was a state called Kievan Rus. This is where it was located. The Slavic people lived here. The city of Kiev was their capital. Between 980 and 1015, the Kievan Rus was ruled by Grand Prince Volodymyr. In Russian, his name is Vladimir. In Ukrainian, Volodymyr. And as fate would have it, these are also the names of the presidents of these two countries today. Anyway, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians draw their lineage from this Slavic state. A lot changed in the centuries that followed, and for a lot of it, Ukraine was under Russian rule. In the 1900s, the two were Soviet republics, Russia the most powerful of the 15 republics, and Ukraine the second most powerful. It had defense industries, large agricultural lands, and housed much of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, Ukraine was the arch rival of the United States. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Ukraine became independent, as did Russia. Ukraine inherited much of Soviet nuclear arsenal, but gave it up to Russia in 1994. In exchange, Moscow guaranteed Ukraine's security and promised to respect its sovereignty. They signed the Budapest Memorandum along with these countries. Cut to November 2013, Viktor Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine. He had a reputation for heavy-handedness, corruption, and above all, for being openly pro-Moscow. In 2013, he rejected an EU trade deal. This deal could have meant greater integration with the European Union. Instead, Yanukovych decided to take a $15 billion bailout from Russia. To many Ukrainians, it felt like being sold to Moscow, so protests broke out. They were called Euromaidan. Euro because these protests were about Europe, and Maidan because they happened in Kiev's Maidan, what we today know as the Independence Square. Here, protesters chanted, "Sign the EU deal, Yanukovych must step down." Russia supported the president, the West supported the protesters. In February 2014, Yanukovych's government was toppled, the president was driven out of Ukraine, he fled to Russia. Not every Ukrainian was happy with this. Many in the Russian-speaking East wanted Yanukovych to stay. When he was driven out, the minority felt disenfranchised. On the other side of the border, Russia was angry it had lost its puppet. To salvage the situation, Moscow annexed Crimea. Why Crimea? Well, let's now zoom into this part of the world. Crimea is a peninsula. It is located in the Black Sea. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea. It was given to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. Why? Khrushchev hoped the transfer would strengthen, quote-unquote, brotherly ties between the Ukrainian and Russian people. Both Russia and Crimea were part of the Soviet Union, so this transfer did not mean very much. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, Crimea joined it. The peninsula was given special autonomy. It remained home to Russian military bases. Moscow promised to respect Crimean autonomy. Many in Russia were of the opinion that Crimea should not have been allowed to join Ukraine. In 2014, when Yanukovych was ousted from power in Ukraine, Russian military began seizing government buildings in Crimea. Soon the entire peninsula was under military occupation. A referendum followed. On the 16th of March 2014, Crimeans voted to become a part of Russia. Was this vote legitimate? Well, it depends on who you ask. For Putin, this was Crimea's liberation. For the rest of the world, this was Crimea's annexation. The focus then shifted to eastern Ukraine, where Russia-backed separatists had seized territory. Ukrainian forces did not launch an all-out offensive at first, but on the 17th of July 2014, when a flight carrying 298 people was shot down by these rebels, Ukrainian forces decided to flush out the rebels. The separatists began losing ground, so the Russian army stepped in. They invaded eastern Ukraine and fought alongside the rebels. What followed was a series of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. They resulted in the Minsk Accords. This was first signed in 2014. Both sides agreed on ceasefire and military withdrawal. Ukraine agreed to hold elections in the rebel-held areas. 8 years on, the Minsk Accords remain unimplemented. Ukraine stands as the largest European country excluding Russia. It covers an area of more than 600,000 square kilometers with a population of 44 million and a GDP of more than $155 billion. Per capita income, more than $3,700. Today, Ukraine is divided between East and West in more ways than one. The West sees itself as more European. The East is closer to Russia, be it in terms of geography or sentiment. In the West, most Ukrainians speak Ukrainian. In the East, a third are native Russians. In the West, Russia is looked at with suspicion. In the East, Russia is looked at through the lens of shared history and heritage. Ukraine also remains at war. Its forces are fighting the rebels in the East. Rebel leaders are ruling at least two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. Together, they're known as the Donbas region. Russia has once again sent its troops. This time, they're stationed right at the border. What does Vladimir Putin want? For NATO to stop expanding. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance. These countries are the founding members of NATO. These countries joined it during the Cold War, and these countries joined after it. Ukraine wants to join NATO too, but Putin wants NATO to exclude Ukraine and every former Soviet state. And this is just half the story. Like I said, a lot is hidden in history. For starters, there is domestic politics. When Putin annexed Crimea, his approval rating skyrocketed. Keeping the nationalistic drum rolling helps the Russian president. Annexing parts of Ukraine also helps Putin restore Russia's superpower image. Again, back to history. Many Russians view Ukraine's independence as a mistake. It is true that Ukraine was ruled by Russia. In fact, Ukraine has barely remained independent pre-1991. There was a brief period before World War I, and then another stint in 1600. For the rest of its modern history, Ukraine was under Russia. 1 in 6 Ukrainians is an ethnic Russian. 1 in 3 speaks Russian as a native language. So Putin is right when he says historically they were one. But claiming Ukraine on the basis of colonial history is wrong. It will be like Britain claiming India, or South Africa, or Spain claiming the Philippines. Past imperialism cannot justify present-day expansionism. Here's what else history tells us. Ukraine was forcefully Russified. Cut to 1700, Russian leader Catherine the Great started Russifying Ukraine. Ethnic Russians were shipped to this part of the world. Schools were told to teach Russian language. By 1800, the Ukrainian language was banned. In 1930, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin steered a famine in Ukraine. Millions of Eastern Ukrainians were killed. The area was then repopulated with ethnic Russians. In the 1940s, the ethnic Tatars were relocated. They too were replaced with Russians. There is a reason why Eastern Ukraine today has so many native Russian speakers. It was designed to be that way. Eastern Ukraine was always dear to Russia. It has coal, it has iron, fertile land. Its historical connection with Russia was forced. Putin time and again talks about the Holy Rus. He says Russians and Ukrainians are one people. 70% Ukrainians reject this thought. 72% consider Russia a hostile state. Today, 33.3% Ukrainians are ready to take up arms against Russia. 21.7% are ready to stage a civil resistance against Russia. 67% Ukrainians want to join the EU. 59% want to join the NATO. Meet the current Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He came to power in 2019 following a landslide victory. He is a vocal critic of Russia. Zelensky openly opposes Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine. 73% of Ukrainian voters voted this man to power. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky represents the pulse of Ukraine, the Ukraine that wants to remain independent of Russia. But Vladimir Putin wants to become the man who revived Russian imperialism. He does not realize the world has moved on.
I think that's a very interesting summary from the Indian perspective, just looking at all of this and seeing where we stand. So a huge welcome to all of our guests this evening. It's really a great pleasure to see you all. Many of you I've spoken to you and never met in person. Some of you I obviously know particularly well. If everyone can just turn on their cameras for one moment and just greet everyone. On controls this evening as well, we have Britt Landsman. Britt, you will be taking questions off YouTube and Facebook and bringing them across to Zoom, so we can make sure that this isn't a monologue. This is always a dialogue, and it's wonderful to see so many people from all over the world. Sean, I presume you're joining us from Santon?
Howie, I am actually trying to get closer to you in Ilovo, but looking forward to it as always.
And Johan Nel, you're in Budapest.
Yes, I am. Good evening, everyone.
Recently escaped from Kiev. We can't wait to hear your story. Dzvinka, where do you join us from?
I'm in Cape Town.
From Cape Town. Paula Slier, you spend most of your life on airplanes. Where in the world do we find you tonight?
What a surprise. I'm in Moscow.
You're in Moscow this evening. Kim Kerr, you're in Johannesburg.
I am.
Good. Stephen Gruzd, where are you joining us from?
I'm in Waverley, Johannesburg.
Waverley, Johannesburg. Elisheva, previously of Johannesburg, but now where do we find you tonight?
I'm calling in from New York City, everybody. Hi, it's nice to be with you.
Lovely to have you. And Alice, where in the world do we find you?
I'm in Cardiff, but representing my colleagues in London.
Fantastic. Well, a big welcome to all of you. We're going to just do a quick introduction, and then we're going to start segment one. We have said to everyone, though, that we have Rebbetzin Rochi Levitansky on the run at the moment in her car, trying to get out of Sumy. If she joins us, we're going to cut wherever we are and just take her at that moment. So we're going to ask your forgiveness if we do cut into you as she joins us. She's in a vehicle at the moment. She doesn't know if she's going to have internet connectivity. Sean, just before we do our introduction, you've actually been to the Ukraine, have you not?
Yes, Howie. So about 4.5 years ago, we went to Odessa. It was Sukkot, and we went with an extraordinary organization called Tikva. I actually found this in my kids' room this evening, who do amazing work. I mean, obviously, we talk maybe a bit more about it this evening. The Jewish history through Ukraine is remarkably interesting, and it's very difficult post the war and certainly post the Soviet Union to get a specific handle on the number of Jews in the Ukraine. So if you measure it by people who identify as Jewish, it's about 100,000, but certainly those who would be offered Israeli citizenship estimates are up to 400,000. And so in Odessa, people think there are about 45,000 Jews. It's a remarkable city full of history, Jabotinsky, et cetera, et cetera. It's got 4 shuls, 2 Jewish centers and 12 Jewish day schools, but most importantly, it's got 4 Jewish orphanages. And so we went to Odessa to visit those Jewish orphanages. We went to what was billed as the largest sukkah in the world for lunch. And we saw the most extraordinary rebuilding of Jewish life, and people from all over the world, some very generous donors who have made a remarkable effort in rebuilding Jewish life. And actually, Howie, to cut a little bit to our paper on page 9 of today's edition, this picture, this is a shul that we went to. This is one of the rabbis of the Odessa community who last Shabbos, they were all evacuated. So it's difficult to get all the facts, but we think all of those orphans, all of those kids have been safely moved out of Odessa. But it was a remarkable experience, and please God, they'll be back post the war to continue the remarkable work that was being done there.
So we do have to actually pay tribute to the Michel family, who have funded many of the orphanages in Odessa, and also the Michel Scholarship Foundation, which has thousands of kids as graduates of university in South Africa, Israel, and the Ukraine. So the remarkable work that the Michel family have actually done in the Ukraine is really something we should all be enormously proud of. We're going to just do a very quick introduction, and then we're going to be beginning with Johan and Kim telling us some of the amazing stories and experiences that they've been through over the last few days. The time has just gone 8 p.m. South Africa time. It's 8 p.m. in Kiev, 7 p.m. in Budapest, 6 p.m. in London, and the world once again faces a war in Europe. On behalf of the South African Jewish Report, I welcome you all this evening, no matter where in the world you're watching us from, as we broadcast tonight on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. If you are watching us on YouTube tonight, we ask you please to give us a like and a subscribe on the channel. That will allow us to communicate with you more efficiently and easily in the days ahead. Tonight is the 133rd webinar brought to you by the South African Jewish Report since lockdown began almost 2 years ago. To everyone that in fact the latest edition of the South African Jewish Report is out and available, and of course this edition is covered with news about what's happening in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, and its impact on the Jewish community all over both Russia and Ukraine itself. We distribute our hard copy newspaper in approximately 242 locations around South Africa. So please pick up an edition at your school, your shul, your kosher butchery, your kosher restaurant, at Checkers, Pick and Pay, Discam, Woolworths, Spar, Exclusive Books, CNA, We are all over the place, and this is an edition you really don't want to miss. So a reminder, if you can't get hold of a physical edition, we are available on the web on www.sajr.co.za. There you can download either the entire edition or alternatively look at each individual story on its own. We are enormously grateful not just to be joined by a crowd of thousands and thousands of people around the world this evening, watching us on Facebook, Zoom and YouTube, but also to our sponsors this evening who assist us in making sure we can deliver remarkable content to you at relevant times, at times of crises, at moments that the world faces right now. Just a reminder as well that this is not a monologue, this is a dialogue. If you're watching us on Zoom, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. Please feel free to pose any questions to any of our panelists. On the chat section of Zoom as well, please feel free just to comment. I see Linda has joined us from San Diego. Britt is in fact busy watching what's happening on YouTube and on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like. That allows us to be able to communicate with you much easier. But if you put your question on Facebook or YouTube, Britt will bring it across and Sean and I will pose those questions to the audience that we have. And with that, we're going to dive straight in. We're going to ask everyone except Johan and Kim to turn off their cameras. And Sean and I are going to have a discussion about what is happening on the ground. Kim, I described you a little earlier as one of the great national treasures of our country. For the last week or just over a week, you've been helping South Africans escape the Ukraine. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground.
Pain, fear, nothing that you see on TV. The stories that I hear, the phone calls that I get, the photographs that people send me are not the same as what I'm seeing on the news. On the news, it's politics, it's a bomb here or there. But it's not what I'm hearing on the ground. I'm seeing people who are trapped in their homes, hiding from Ukrainian soldiers when they have got Ukrainian children over 16 that are obligated to go and fight, hiding from Russian snipers down below that they can see outside their buildings, and fearing for their lives, afraid to go out to get food because the Russian soldiers are looting all the food stores, afraid to get in their vehicles and just try and make a run for it because things like ambulances being blown up and cars being attacked with the 7-year-old being killed are the stories that are coming through their WhatsApps. We've got people afraid to go into the bomb shelters because they're not very well kept. So they're hiding in their apartments in the closest, next to the wall that they feel looks the strongest on the 5th, 6th, 7th floor of their building. We've got guys who are held up in really dangerous areas, 2 floors down in basements where they don't have bomb shelters, running upstairs every day or two just to change clothes, have a shower, get more food, get downstairs. We've got people trying to get to borders. I mean, Johan will tell you about that kind of thing. It's badly written action film because it's so far-fetched that in 2022, this is what's going on. I look at the photographs that people send me of their children in shelters. The photographs of hundreds, if not thousands of people all standing, trying to get on the same free train because they don't have money. The phone calls saying, please, I need money. I need to get a car. I can't get on the train. It's not what you hear about. This is not what you see on TV, but this is the reality. This is what's going on. They just want to get out. And there's so many people who have managed to. I think we've probably gotten out about 85 to date. It's very difficult to tell because we might deal with one person and he's helping his family. But there are so many who cannot get out because of the situations they're finding themselves in. And there's so many who, even if they could get out, have said they will not leave their families. They will not leave those that are not allowed to leave. They will hide their sons. And it's just too terrible. And then on those who are able to leave, we get phone calls like I got today of, Kim, please help. I've got 4 South African citizens who are trapped in no man's land between, just on the border of Lithuania, and they're not allowed in. Get hold of someone, get the ambassador on, do something. And there's me sitting at work, phoning an ambassador saying, help. And thankfully, we've got these amazing ambassadors who are seriously doing their utmost to help as much as they can in the most atrocious of situations where, because it's war, there aren't really rules.
So Kim, we're going to come back to you in a few minutes and you're going to tell us about some of the stories that you've told me over the last day or two. But can I ask, do we know how many South Africans are in Ukraine?
Every time I think I know, another person contacts me. I mean, during that intro, I got a message from someone saying, please help my brother, his wife, and his 2 children. I didn't know about them. I added them to a group and one of my partners said, who have you just added? Who is that? And I told her, and she said, I've never heard of him. And that's what happens. Not everybody, unfortunately, people don't understand the necessity to let your embassy know when you are in a different country. It doesn't have to be in a war situation. We saw it with the tsunami. We saw it when COVID started. We're seeing it now. Let your embassy know. Wherever you are in the world, email them so that they keep you informed.
So just thumbs up, how many South Africans are in Ukraine?
So the ambassador thinks that there's about 200. I find it very hard to believe that of that, 100 have gotten hold of me. So I think that there are more, but it's impossible. It's impossible to tell. I know we've gotten 85 out. I know there's another, say 35, 40 on my group now, but I don't know how many that represents because we each take on certain people and one person on the group may represent a family of 4. And not all those people in that family of 4 are South Africans. So, you might have a Ukrainian husband or a Ukrainian wife or child.
So Johan Nel, you joining us tonight from Budapest, which is great news because it means you managed to get out. But what on earth were you doing in Ukraine in the first instance?
So, Howard, I teach English for a Mexican school. And in October last year, I decided to travel the world for a bit because now I earn a salary by working online. And I went to Kosovo and to Turkey. So in Turkey, the school managed to get the right documents. I was actually waiting for documents in order to apply for a Mexican work visa. When I arrived in Istanbul a few weeks later, the school had the documents ready and I went to go apply for my Mexican work visa at the Mexican consulate in Istanbul. My visa was rejected because of communication errors with the person that interviewed me. And the school advised me to go to the closest city with a Mexican embassy to go apply again, to reapply. So I looked at my options and I decided I'm going to go to Kiev. I've never been there. I've been to Russia for 1 year and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to go to Ukraine. Got to Ukraine, lived there for 3 weeks and I applied for my visa. The day I had to go pick up my work visa, the bomb started falling.
So where were you when it happened? Were you in Kiev?
I was in Kiev, in the center.
So tell us what it was like. What was day number 1, 24th of February?
So I usually sleep like my online school starts at 4 p.m. So I'm a late sleeper. I sleep till 10, 11 a.m. But that morning, 4:30, I woke up because of bomb sirens. And I immediately knew what was going on because obviously the tension was there, the 2, 3, 5, 4, 5 weeks previous to the invasion. And I looked out of the window, I opened my window, I could hear bombs here and there, 2 or 3, maybe 4 in time span of 2 hours. I called my parents because my parents are they're in Thailand, so the time difference good enough for them to call them. They'll be awake, and I'm telling them what's going on. So they're just trying to calm me down. I put on the news. I see on the news, okay, things are getting bad. Russia's busy invading. So a week before that, I joined a Telegram group with a lot of foreigners. The group's name was Foreigners Staying in Kiev. So the 3 weeks before the invasion, a lot of people already evacuated because they were scared that things are going to get bad. The group was created for us. If things go south, we have 400 to 500 foreigners on that group that can help each other, give information if the war starts. So there's a lot of people that can't evacuate the first day because trains are full, buses are full, taxi drivers charge you a huge amount of money to take you to borders. And with the help of my parents, I decided to just stay in my apartment because in the center of Kiev at that time, I was safe. The Russians weren't close to Kiev that time. And I tried to sleep it out the first nights. I couldn't get any sleep because obviously you hear bombs falling again. Every 2 hours, you hear a bomb fall. I wake up the next day, and this British Pakistani national, his name is Murtaza Hamid. He contacts me, and he's from the group, from the Telegram group. He tells me, bro, I'm also alone. You're alone. We need to get together because evacuating a war zone alone is not going to work. We need to team up and reach each other. So we plan on reaching each other the second day, and still he's too scared. He's too scared to leave his apartment. So I stay in my apartment. I spend the whole second day going to supermarkets close to my apartment to buy water. The first supermarket I get there, people are panic shopping. There's no water left. I go to a second supermarket, there's no water left. I go to a third supermarket, I find water. I buy myself 6 bottles of water. Get back to the apartment. I tell Murtaza, okay, tomorrow morning we have to meet. It doesn't matter. We are scared, both of us, but we have to try and get out of here. And it does not help. We just stay here in our apartments the whole time. So I meet him at Vokzalna metro station in the center of Kiev. It is the biggest metro station, train station in Ukraine. I meet up with him. Now he asks me, what do I have? I tell him I've only got 6 liters of water. I have no food. I cannot withdraw money because there's no money in ATMs. I have money on my card and that's that. He's got a lot of cash. He withdrew, I think, $1,600 a week earlier that he would have used that for his university funds. And now his university is closed. So he's got that money. He's got food. I've got water. We go into the train station. The trains are packed. It's chaos, absolute chaos. People throwing other people off the train just to get in. It was like scenes out of World War II. It was crazy. So now we have a plan B. On that same Telegram group, there's a few Turkish guys. They live in Kiev. They're taxi drivers. And they're willing to help. But obviously, understandably, they are going to risk their lives driving all the way from Kiev to the border of Poland. So they charge us $1,000. Murtaza pays that $1,000, and I organize that someone in my family pays the $500 from their account into his account. Now we're on our way to the Polish border. It takes us about 8 hours, normally 8 hours from Kiev to the Polish border. It took us 22 hours. Was everyone from the center of Kiev and Eastern Russia, they're on their way to the Polish border. After 22 hours, or in between 24 hours, we've got people walking next to us. They're walking to the border. That's about 200, 300 kilometers still away from the border. They don't have cars. Taxis can't help them. So we stop every 3, 4, 5 kilometers and we hand out our water and our food because it's single moms and children, old men, old women. So we're young, healthy men. We don't need water and food as much as they do because they're walking, but our car is full. We can't help them. The only way we can help them is by giving our water and food. We get to the Polish border after 22 hours. There's a 30-kilometer queue of cars waiting to enter the border. the news we get is that it's going to take 70 to 90 hours for us to reach the border. Now we're in a situation because we handed out all our food and water. We cannot wait 70 to 90 hours before getting more water or more food. So we decide we will walk this 30 kilometers. We take our bags out of the taxi. I throw away 50% of my clothes just to get my bag lighter, and we start walking. On the way there, we're not the only ones walking. There are thousands of people walking because some taxi drivers refuse to wait in these lines going to the border. So people paid taxi drivers the same amount that we did, but the taxi drivers refused to just wait in their row. So the taxi drivers chase them out of the cars as well. They also have to walk. Now there we experience a lot of women and children, old women. I've got my own luggage, and every few kilometers I help another woman with her luggage. Took me about 15 hours to walk the 30 kilometers to get to the Polish border. Now, once I get to the Polish border, that is absolute chaos. There's bonfires everywhere. The first thing I see is bonfires. Now I think to myself, why is there bonfires? People sitting around bonfires. I know it's cold, but you're supposed to stand in line to cross the border. Everyone is so chilled, sitting around bonfires. Nothing is organized at all. I hear gunshots, warning shots from Ukrainian border guards. I get there, I talk to people, ask them some questions like, what is going on here? This is not what I expected. And they're like, yeah, we've been here for 3 days. No toilets, no food, no water. It's absolute chaos. So now I'm thinking to myself, oh, wow, I call my parents again. I'm like, Mom, Dad, I made it to the Polish border, but you would not believe what's going on here. This is crazy. After walking 30 kilometers, I am exhausted. I have not slept for so long. Since the first bomb dropped, I probably had 3 hours sleep every night until I got to the Polish border, no sleep. So by the time we have a Ukrainian woman with us. Sorry, I did not mention this. We picked up a Ukrainian woman halfway on the way to the Polish border. She's got a German boyfriend. He contacted me, he got my contact off the Telegram group. He told me, man, my girlfriend is in this city. I can't remember where, but the city is being bombed by Russians. I need to get her out of there. I see you guys are on the way to Poland. I'm going to drive all the way from Munich to the Polish border to come pick her up. Please, 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 can you pick her up? So he sends money to the taxi driver also from his account, and we pick up the girl. Now, Murtaza freaks out completely, and I'm just like, man, we've got to chill, we've got to think straight here, we need to get a solution. So we take the girl and we're with the girl in line, and the Ukrainian border guards are like, are you Ukrainian? And she's like, yeah. And he takes her and he says, you can come through, we prioritize Ukrainian women and children, foreigners back. And we tell her, okay, go. She doesn't want to go because she's scared. Like, it's so chaotic at the border that she does not even want to go alone. And we call her boyfriend, we tell him like, Philip, she does not want to go. Daria does not want to go without us, but there's no other choice. And he talks to her, and she goes after she talked to him. Now, we stand there, it's about 15 hours, standing in that queue. We thought that's the actual border. I get added on a WhatsApp group, Evacuation South Africa. And I'm like, okay, whoa, this is interesting. I go through the group, I see there's actually a lot of South Africans trying to evacuate. Now, Lorraine, Haley, and Kim, they're the admins on this group, and they're trying to help us all get out. So I'm like, okay, thank God I found this group. I've got people that knows what happens behind the borders at every border. Now I'm going to get more information on what to do. So Lorraine tells me there's 2 South African girls on their way. They also walked all the way, 17 or 18 Ks, and they're really close to me. So by this time, now I lost Murtaza, my British Pakistani friend. I don't know where he is. I lost him in the crowd. There's thousands of people. I can't find him. But I find the 2 South African girls. Their legs are out of it from all the walking. Now I stand with them. We're in the queue. So in the queue, there's this white line. You are not allowed to cross the white line. If you cross the white line, the Ukrainian border guards are going to give you shit. And there's a lot of people behind you pushing because everyone just wants to get in front of the line. So all that pressure from behind, people pushing you, you cannot help by crossing the white line. And this one South African girl by accident crosses the white line, and the border guard kicks her. The Ukrainian border guard kicks her. I'm like, man, you cannot do this. Nigerian guy crosses the line for the third or fourth time, maybe after getting warnings, and the Ukrainian border guard hits him with a Kalashnikov in the face. I'm like, oh no, this is crazy. You don't handle animals like this. But look what you're doing to the people here. We're all just people that came to help Ukraine. Most of them are students or people that work there. We were in Ukraine to help the country. And you're prioritizing Ukrainians. We left here out in the cold with no food, no toilet, nothing. After a few hours of staying there, me and the two South African girls get through the first border checkpoint where we thought it was the border. Another 2-kilometer walk. We get to the actual border. If you think the first border checkpoint was chaos, you get to the second border where the actual border is, you are like, oh no, it can't be. There are thousands and thousands of people, and Moroccans, Arabians, Nigerians, they start fighting each other. They're breaking bottles there. The Ukrainian border guards aren't doing anything. After a while, some of them come out, they start shooting rubber bullets. They have batons, they start hitting the people in the crowds with the batons. So at the second border, they prioritize all women and children, not only Ukrainian. And I tell the two South African girls, you have to go. They don't want to leave without me. I told them, guys, your safety is important. I am a man. I can handle myself. I will get through this. Just go. One of them are injured. Just go through the border. So they go through the border. After standing there for 7 hours, I decide, man, no, I cannot stay here. I'm going to get hurt. Something's going to happen. I'm exhausted. I'm hungry. I haven't had water in almost 24 hours. So I decide to walk back and I start hitchhiking. Luckily, there's a van driving past me and the van stops, full of ex-Ukrainian military. They come from Poland to fight with the Ukrainians. They pick me up. Tell them, please, I need a lift to Lviv. Lviv is the closest city to the Polish border. I think the second biggest city in Ukraine. They take me all the way to Lviv. After sharing our stories and whatnot, they give me some food. They give me some water. By that time, Howard, that was when you guys called me. I was on my way back to Lviv.
So just one of the things you said to me at the time was, I'm bleeding through my shoes and socks.
Yeah, my feet were bleeding. I had blisters everywhere. My hamstrings were pulled. It was a struggle. So now I get to Lviv. Luckily, I've got a friend that has a friend in Lviv that owns a hotel, and she gives me the room for the night for free. I get myself a good meal. I get some good rest, 8 hours sleep for the first time in 3 days. So that I have energy for the next day to target my next border. I wake up the next morning and there's the South African called Johnny. We get in contact. He's in Lviv. I'm in Lviv. He's alone. I'm alone. We meet up at the Lviv train station. We get to the train station, same as at Vokzhalna and Kiev, chaos. People throwing other people off the trains to get on it. The train board says this train is coming on this track at this time, and then a train arrives that's going to Eastern Ukraine on that track at that time. So I'm like, oh no, this is crazy again. So time to step back, plan B. We go out of the metro station. Johnny's like, I have this amount of money. I'm like, okay, I have this amount of money. Let's find a new taxi. We get this taxi driver. The taxi driver says he cannot take us to Uzhgorod. We need to go to Uzhgorod. Uzhgorod is the city closest to the Slovakian and Hungarian border from Lviv. He cannot take us to Uzhgorod because it's snowing and there's a lot of military checkpoints everywhere, full of traffic. They cannot do it. They're going to waste time. They're going to waste money. So my little knowledge of Russian and the taxi driver's little knowledge of English, we communicate good enough to understand each other. And he's like, I can do something for you. And he calls a bus driver. He asks the bus driver, do you have buses going from Lviv to Uzhgorod? The bus driver says, I just left a few minutes ago. I'm on my way. I've got space for 2. The taxi driver tells us, get in the taxi. We're going to chase this bus down now. I'm like, thank God. We've got a plan B again, and it worked. So we chase down the bus, and we meet the bus at a petrol station. Oh, we get to the taxi driver, to the bus driver, we pay him 3,000 hryvnias each. I think that is about 1,500 rand, if I'm not mistaken, each to take us to Uzhgorod. On the way to Uzhgorod, there's military checkpoints everywhere. Ukrainian officers stop us, they come into the bus and they shout, they scream and shout at me because I look Russian. They think I'm a Russian. They just want to see my passport. At every single military checkpoint, 2 or 3 Ukrainian guards come into the bus and they just want my passport. They want my passport. I'm like, guys, chill. I am not Russian. I am South African. And they don't believe me. Some of them don't believe me because you are white. How can you be from South Africa? I'm like, oh man, I'm not in the mood for this conversation now. I cannot explain this. I cannot explain the history of my country to you now. I'm trying to get to the border to evacuate out of Ukraine. Oh, finally, we get to Uzhgorod. Now, our aim was to go to Hungary, but there's a Ukrainian girl that tells us, do not go to the Hungarian border. The border's name is Chop. Go to the Slovakian border. The Slovakian border is 5 kilometers away from here. Go on Bolt, get a taxi. Taxi will not charge you more than 50 bucks, 50 rand, 100 hryvnias. So we get the taxi, we get to the Slovakian border, and immediately I get medical attention for my legs and my feet. So because my legs and my feet were injured, they called Johnny. They're like, we're going to prioritize these 2 boys because he's the one boy's got an injury. I actually told them Johnny is my older brother, so that they won't send me out without him, so that he can come with me. And he comes with me. They put us on a bus. Took us about 4 hours before we crossed the Ukrainian side of the border, and another 2 before we crossed the Slovakian side of the border. Once we got to the Slovakian side, people accepted us with open arms. There were food everywhere. They handed out free SIM cards. They handed out jackets, blankets. We had free buses going to the capital city of Slovakia. It was amazing. So once we arrived at a city in Slovakia called Kosice, we took a train straight to Budapest, and now we are here living with a fellow South African that's married to a Hungarian woman, and he's looking after us now.
Johan, when we spoke, one of the things you said to me is, I can't get money, the ATMs don't work, but I have my iPad. I'm prepared to swap my Apple iPad for a ride to the border. Do you still have your iPad? Did you manage to save it? I still have my iPad.
I still have my iPad. Thank God I did not get to that point. But that's what the people did, was everyone withdrew all the money in all the ATMs and all the banks in the first 3 days. So if you needed to get somewhere and you only have money in your account, the only thing you can do is make a trade with something valuable.
So, Kim, we've heard the story. It's a remarkable, remarkable story. And we want to remind everyone watching us, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube or on Zoom, please, if you want to ask any questions to Kim or Johan, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom, or just post a comment on Facebook or YouTube, and Britt will bring those questions across. But Kim, very briefly, you told me some stories yesterday, one by a South African, what we refer to as colored person married to a Ukrainian, and one, the story of a doctor. Won't you very briefly tell us those stories, please?
So first of all, to get the story from the colored gentleman that I was speaking about was very difficult. I'd heard that he was having trouble, and we tried to get in touch with him. He was afraid that we were Russian spies, so he wouldn't take our calls until the ambassador sent him a message and said, you can speak to them, they're safe. So I gave him a call, and we spoke for about 40 minutes, and he had to keep stopping every time there was shells or bombs or shooting or air raids or anything of that nature. And you could almost hear him praying under his breath when his building wasn't hit. He is a man who has been living in Ukraine and married to a Ukrainian woman for the last year. He has, well, together now they have 2 children, one who is 15 years old and one who is 18 years old. He hasn't adopted the children, but he fathers them. The difficulty that we have is that as an 18-year-old, that child is no longer able to be adopted, which means that child cannot become South African. And because the child is Ukrainian, he's obligated to fight the war. So from 16 years old to 60 years old, you have an obligation. If you can carry a gun, if you can hold a gun, you will use a gun. So for about a week, last week, the Ukrainian soldiers would go door to door, and they would keep the lights off and hide, and just be very quiet until the building was empty. But most of the time they are quiet. They've got a limited amount of food, which they ration each day because they don't know how long they're going to be there. They are one of the families who don't want to use their bomb shelters. So they've made a makeshift bed area where they feel it's the safest in their apartment. When he looks out of his window, he says during the day, he sees the Russians go back. It's almost like they go back to sleep. So when you look out, when I look on Google Maps at his apartment, I can see he's about a kilometer or so from the port, from this big turning circle by a port. And the Russians are obviously staying there. And they come out during the day, shooting, attacking any vehicles they see. So he's really afraid to go out. The difficulty for him is that his wife also has a brother who's about 10 kilometers away with her parents in their 60s. He doesn't want to leave them alone. And he said he would rather die than abandon his child. This is his son, and he won't abandon them. And it was just, he sent me photos with a promise for me not to share triangulatable photos. He doesn't want any Russian to get hold of where he is, which apartment he's in. He sits in the dark with the blinds closed all day, all night. He says that at night, the bombs are non-stop. The fighting is the shooting is non-stop. They sleep with one eye open. Nobody has really rested. Everybody's always tearful. Thankfully, I've been able to get him a counselor when he's ready. He'll make use of that. So one of the things that we have on our platform is a group of now 14 psychologists and trained professionals, a lot of them specializing in PTSD and trauma counseling. And we offer that to anybody who needs it, whether it's family in South Africa or anywhere else in the world, or to the evacuees who've already successfully evacuated, or for the people who are busy evacuating. And another guy that we have
Kim, before we come on to that, there are a lot of questions that have come in for you and Johan, and maybe we can just pose some of those questions to you. Johan, Saul Jasanovsky wants to know, he says, what was your experience of humanity during your time in Ukraine after the war began? Were there moments you were amazed or moments you were disappointed?
Both. You had moments where you were amazed, where you're like, wow, look at all these people working together. Look at all these people giving away food and water, helping old people, helping women. There was, at some points, you could see a unity. You could see unity between all foreigners and people trying to evacuate. But at other points, there's people taking advantage of the situation, people robbing you with knife point, robbing you. There's nothing you can do. You can't call the police and say, well, someone just robbed me. What are they going to do? Sorry, man, I'm fighting a war. So a lot of people, I've heard a lot of stories of people that got robbed. And yeah, so I would say both.
So Shandor Donner, who I presume is Hungarian based on the name, says, Johan, wow, an amazing story. At this stage, what are your plans for the next few days and the days ahead?
No, I am just sitting it out here in Hungary, trying to get my mental health back in order, because obviously going through what I did go through is not normal. So yeah, I think I'm just going to wait. Maybe in a few days, I'll fly back to South Africa. I'll stay with my older brother, apply for my Mexican work visa there, and then head back to Mexico.
And Dion Pinal says, Johan, would you say the Ukrainian soldiers were acting the way they were because of the chaos and they had control over it, or would you say they were acting unreasonably?
Also both. There were some times that I saw, okay, these things they are doing is they need to do it because there was chaos and they had to control the chaos, but also you've got other ways to control the chaos, not with violence, not the way they did. Sometimes you have to understand their side of the story too. I mean, they're in the war, there's someone invading their country and they have to stand at the border post letting foreigners through where they actually want to go fight. They don't want to be there.
So Johan, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there for a moment, because we did say to you that Rebbetzin Rochi Levitansky, if you could join us, would join us and speak to us. So we gave fair warning, and Rochi, a huge welcome to you. You have had one hell of a few days.
Hi, good.
I'm going to try to turn off your camera in the hope that it will give us better internet connectivity. Rochi, can you hear us? Rochi? I think we may have lost Rochi, but hopefully she'll join us. Rochi, I'm going to leave you on. If you can hear us, please log back in if you can. I want to read to you what in fact Rochi sent to me. She said, "Hi, sorry to ruin your program, but it seems like I won't be able to join tomorrow. I don't know where we'll be. I don't know if we'll be able to log on. These are very uncertain times. Only Hashem knows. But we'll be in touch tomorrow." And I said, "We can play it by ear. Are things getting worse?" And she said, "All around us, yes." So if she can join us for a minute or two, they are on the run. They're usually in Sumy, which is in the north of Ukraine. And that is very close to where the Russian invading forces, in fact, entered Ukraine. So if Rochi does join us, forgive me, I'm going to interrupt who's ever talking at that point in time again. But Johan, sorry, I interrupted you.
No problem at all, Howard. What was that question again? Oh, the unreasonable of the border guards. So things they did was really unreasonable, and it was really discriminating, like hitting. Rochi's here. Rochi's
yeah,
with
I think Rochi, let's try unmute you. Oh, Bruchim Habayim, it is so wonderful to see you, Rochi.
Okay, I'm not so sure how long my internet will last for. Did you hear anything I said earlier?
I didn't, unfortunately, but please tell us again. I think Rochi's internet will be coming in and out. Rochi, of course, comes from Johannesburg. She's a Chabad Shlicha in Sumy in Ukraine, and they're on the run at the moment. We're not quite sure where they are, but as soon as she joins us again, we'll interrupt everyone again. So forgive us for that, but she is in the middle of a war. So Johan, we're talking about whether the border guards were being unreasonable or not. One of the things that's been often reported in the South African media is that the border guards are behaving in a very racist way towards Africans and people of color. Are they behaving that way only to people of color, or are they behaving that way to all foreigners?
They are behaving that way to people of color, because I did not face any discrimination in the matter that I saw the African people faced in discrimination. The discrimination that I faced was the fact that I look Russian. The discrimination that they faced were violent.
And Johan, a number of people have asked us, your Pakistani friend, are you in contact with him? What's happened to him? And the two South African girls you were traveling with and the girl you picked up along the way, do you know where they are? Are they all safe?
Okay, the girl that we were traveling with, her boyfriend Philip, gave me a call the other day. He thanked me so much. He wants to meet me. He wants to go have a beer with me. His girlfriend is safe with him in Germany. And yeah, she is safe. She's safe. The two South African girls that crossed the Polish border, they are safe. And my British Pakistani friend, he managed to message me 2 days ago. He is safe. He crossed the border of Slovakia yesterday morning. He's headed to Amsterdam, and then from there he will fly back to the UK.
So far, Johan, all relatively good stories.
Yes.
So, Kim, We know, for example, Ronnie Aptierko, who many people will know from Johannesburg, filmmaker, founder of Internet Solutions. He managed to exit out of Poland, not last night, the night before. Johan Nel says, what a remarkable, brave man you are. Deborah Judakin says, how can I help? She's a Zimbabwean, born and raised, UCT and Rhodes, now living in San Diego. She wants to help. We're going to, in our next segment, which Sean's going to be running, we're going to deal very much with that. But Kim, if people are listening, if people want to either help you or alternatively help the people there, or if there are people watching us who happen to be in Ukraine at the time, give us one last word of advice that you would give to them.
The first of all, hold space for people and understand that what you're seeing is not the full story. And these people really need your prayers and your best wishes. Second of all, for those who are living in accommodation, I got a call just before this webinar to say, please, I need to get out of this accommodation tomorrow and I've got nowhere to go. Please help me. There are 5 of us. I got another SMS to say, I need accommodation. Has anybody got accommodation? I'll go anywhere. I don't care where I have to go. So these people have lost everything. They've left everything. They don't have money. They need places to stay, preferably nearby. And then the other thing is donations. So we work with a charity called We Are South Africans, a very well-kept, well-audited, very well-known charity in South Africa who have now decided for the first time to work with a project that's abroad. And they are working very closely with us to send money for transport to people who need to get to places where we found accommodation further away, get food to people, get whatever they need. And we are working on getting money together for flights for those who need to get back to South Africa.
Is DIRCO helping?
Our ambassadors have been amazing. I keep hearing that DIRCO doesn't help. There's frustrations. This is South Africa. We know the wheel turns a little bit too slowly for our liking. But I'll never ever make the assumption when I phone an ambassador and he can't take my call that he's not busy on another call that's equally, if not more important than mine. And what I can tell you is that the ambassador in Ukraine has been phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal, Andre Groeneveld. And we've got ambassadors working around.
Where is the South African ambassador in Ukraine at the moment? Because he has left Kiev, is that right?
He's only recently, when they started moving towards there, he has recently managed to get out. I'm not sure exactly where he is now. He left really at the last minute. In fact, his words to me were, the South African flag is flying outside, and I will leave when everybody else has left. But it did get to a point where, it got really dangerous in that area. And, he was living in a bunker with his wife and his children, and he did have to leave. But after a day of traveling, being stopped at every kilometer or two, he eventually had to stop and try again the next day himself. It's not easy on anyone, really.
Yeah. Kim, if you can put the details for donations into the chat, please. If anyone would like to help you and your organization doing literally God's work, then please, we're going to ask people to do that. And Johanna, I just want to read to you something that comes from June of YouTube. And she said, I'm praying for God's hands to continue protection over you, Johan, and all the people of Ukraine. May this war end soon. God bless you all. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us this evening. You can stay on with pleasure if you like. If you need to go, Johan, you're in the beautiful city of Budapest. Go enjoy it. Kim, thank you. I'm sure your phone is filled with more people requiring help. We're going to take a very quick ad break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about what the Jewish community around the world is doing to help.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Thank
Johan.
you.
The story of Wits goes back over 100 years when the idea of a university on the Witwatersrand was nurtured through a spirited fundraising campaign in 1917. Within a few decades of its establishment in 1922, WITS had become one of the foremost universities on the African continent, producing skilled graduates who advanced their communities, South Africa, and the world. WITS was envisaged as an open university that would know no distinctions of class, wealth, race, or creed. A democratic university offering higher education to young men and women who would otherwise be unable to afford it. This proud tradition continues to this day, with the majority of its 40,000 students being the first in their family to attend university. The extraordinary talent of WITS academics and researchers has built WITS's reputation as one of the most prestigious global institutions of its kind. Since its inception, over 200,000 WITSies have graduated from the university. Alumni with an edge who continue to change our world in business, in finance, in medicine, in industry, and in the arts for the good of all. WITS acknowledges our alumni over the ages, from international celebrities to unsung heroes and heroines. The university is proud of all its graduates and also honors those who have shaped our world. You may know a young man who not long ago slept in the library, raised his orphaned nieces, taught himself code and graduated as a geologist, whose technological breakthrough in seismic technology will change the lives of South African mine workers in our deepest underground spaces. You may have read of the youngest women ever to design the Serpentine Pavilion in London, one of Britain's most prestigious buildings. You may not be surprised to hear that they're all WITSies, leaders of their own architectural firm based in Johannesburg. Against the odds, you may have immigrated as a medical graduate at the top of your class, and now you're giving back to your homeland, investing billions to catalyze South African technological developments that will help in the fight against coronavirus and cancer. You've surely heard of the Daun child, Australopithecus sediba, and Homo naledi, and the academics who've challenged the timeline of humanity. Their contribution lives on in their discoveries, and their names are carved into the very bedrock of our institution. Their legacy, ours and yours. You may be aware of a few determined young women who walked kilometers to school each day, rising from the margins to establish their own place in the world, giving opportunities to the next generation through their expertise and generosity. You may not have heard of them yet, but you will. Tough childhood, hard work, and the WITS edge. You may have danced all night as a first-year anthropology student at the Free People's Concert and birthed the first truly diverse band in the land, who went on to global fame, whose music lives on forever, whose creativity and curiosity, pride and passion were forged at WITS. You may only have been at university for a fraction of these 100 years, but you are part of our history, and WITS is part of yours. Our success is your success. Our story is your story. From the moment you arrived on campus, you began to leave your mark. As surely as the pillars of the Great Hall support its overarching gable, your generosity in contributing to the future of the university keeps us moving forwards with confidence and hope. You are all part of our legacy, with many exciting journeys and stories still to come. You can ensure that our legacy will live on for future generations, doing good for the next 100 years and beyond.
Sean, it did feel like we needed to take a deep breath after some of those stories.
Yes, it really did. I mean, remarkable and horrifying but inspiring stories. So I think it really, Howie, is a great segue to talk to Ellie and Alice and really start to understand what else is happening in the Jewish world. So if we could ask Ellie and Alice to turn on their cameras. It really is an honor and a privilege to have you here. Maybe Alice, just to start with you, if you could just give us a flavor of World Jewish Relief and more importantly, the work that you're doing in the current crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I work in the programs team within World Jewish Relief, and 3 weeks ago we were responding with, let's work on our dementia care plan. We typically provide material and social support to elderly Jewish communities in Ukraine and a few other countries in the region. And now we're just completely all hands on deck responding. We've worked in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and Georgia for years. And while our disaster humanitarian side is normally elsewhere in Mozambique, Bangladesh, whatnot, our 29 partners in Ukraine and now further in Poland and Moldova have meant that we can respond quite rapidly and quite flexibly. I myself was a former Peace Corps volunteer in Odessa Oblast. I lived there for nearly 2 years before COVID. And so I'm personally also hearing stories from my friends who are still there, who are saying, you know, we're in the basement, our kids are just completely terrified, and getting texts from people all the time saying, you know, do whatever you can, you know, pray for us, shout to your leaders, and such like. But from the World Jewish Relief side, even pre-invasion, we've been having weekly calls with all of our partners there saying, you know, what readiness efforts can we assist with? You know, can we help you get stockpiles, satellite phones, that sort of thing. And then, you know, the day that we're all starting is when this all started on the 24th, you know, starting from 4 a.m., we were all up and discussing what can we do? And we were able to get advances on trenches that we'd already promised them in our normal sphere of programming out to them immediately. And that sort of flexibility and adaptability has allowed them to, when it's safe to go out, get what food is available. In some cases, they've used it to organize evacuations. The Hesed in Odessa has organized some evacuations out to Moldova, our colleagues there. So it's great to see the network all working up. We have partners in Hesed, partners in Kharkiv who can't get cash out at ATMs like Johan was explaining. And so partners in Lviv are transferring funds on personal bank accounts. So it's just this amazing response, not even to mention beyond our partners, but just internationally and all around Ukraine. You know, I'm on multiple WhatsApp, Telegram channels, on Facebook. Everyone just seems to be doing everything they possibly can. And while the week has been very tough, it's incredibly heartwarming to see everyone's response. We continue to call partners when we can. We're also conscious that they've got a million other people to update and be in contact with. And we don't want to be that burden sometimes. But we're hearing from them when we can. You know, we're hearing about a Jewish community in Zaporizhia who organized buses out to Dnipro and then to Lviv, hearing about that train, just, you know, 4 times normal capacity, lights out, no phones. Just incredible stories, and we're doing absolutely everything we can. We launched our appeal, which I should, I guess, be screen sharing. The fundraising team wouldn't be terribly happy with me. We launched our appeal even before the invasion started, thankfully the day before, and the response, I'm in the UK here, has just been absolutely overwhelming. And we know that absolutely every single international INGO is lining up on the border to help, and that outpouring support is great. We're seeing that we have a really, really key point here in that we have long established networks and connections with partners in Ukraine and in other border countries. And this is going to be a long haul, and explaining that to supporters, explaining that to donors is paramount at this point, because yes, there are immediate needs today. There are also going to be immediate needs next week. My executive director, Paul, is even saying, you know, 8 years out from now, thinking of, you know, 2014 to now as well. So helping to not only meet today's needs and get funds to buy, you know, bread and generators and heaters and medical supplies today and this week, but further beyond that, psychological support, trauma counseling, as some people in the chat have mentioned. Even just thinking, World Jewish Relief has a long-standing history of a home repairs program. That's going to be very relative. I don't know what Putin's endgame is. If anybody out there knows, I think some defense ministries would love to know, but we're just thinking what is going to be needed. And beyond sort of support and donations now, continuing to talk about it, continuing to bring it up in conversation with friends who maybe aren't as tuned in or can't be tuned in, or you know, writing to leaders, showing this support internationally that this is, you know, completely wrong and an unfolding humanitarian crisis beyond anything else. I feel a bit rambly, so I'll stop there.
Alice, thank you. There's nothing rambling about what's going on at all. I'm going to switch across to Ellie. I know your two organizations do collaborate, but Ellie, maybe if you could give us a sense your organization and some of the work you're doing. And please do share how we can help from donations. And we'll talk more about that in a moment.
So I'm going to start there. I just popped the link to JDC's emergency campaign into the chat. And happy to talk about that in the campaign in a moment. But before I start, I just want to give like a very brief history. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, just to ground us and to get a sense of why JDC and the work of the joint is able to do what we are able to do in this moment. And that is because JDC, or the Joint, I think you might be more familiar with it, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, was established in 1914. And it was particularly established to be this humanitarian aid organization for Jews in need. Today, it is the largest Jewish humanitarian aid organization, and we've provided over a century of life-saving service around the world. At every key moment in the 20th and 21st century in Jewish history, JDC has been there, and today we operate in 70 countries around the world. For the past 30 years, since the fall of the Soviet Union, JDC has been working in Ukraine. Prior to the conflict, we were providing, so a week ago, we were providing humanitarian aid, including food, medicine, winter relief, home care, and in partnership with World Jewish Relief, the home care repair program, to Jewish elderly, many of whom are Holocaust survivors, just under 40,000, and about 2,500 vulnerable young families and children. The JDC clients that we serve, the joint clients that we serve, have lived through Nazism, communism, and are now facing another incredibly harsh reality. Prior to the war, just to give you a sense of the infrastructure that we've been able to mobilize, JDC has had, we continue to have offices in Kiev, Dnipro, Odessa, and Kharkiv. We have 18 welfare chesed centers, which Alice alluded to, across Ukraine, and our aid reaches Jews in 1,000 different locations. It is this infrastructure and boots on the ground that has allowed us to act as quickly and effectively as we have been in times of crisis. So I'm just going to spend 2 to 3 minutes talking about exactly what we're doing, and then Sean, if you're interested, I can tell you about how all the pieces come together. But basically, the first thing that we're doing is ensuring and prioritizing the care of our most vulnerable Jewish clients. That is primarily vulnerable elderly, and many of whom are bedridden and completely depend on the joint and their home care workers. Alice is nodding because, Alice, I know you've been into these homes. I have too, and have had an elderly Jewish client, potentially someone who's a Holocaust survivor, hold your hand and say, please don't forget me. And that was before what we're dealing with right now. I will say the home care workers are angels. They are righteous Gentiles in this moment. They have actually moved in. Some of them have moved in with the clients in incredibly complex places. So they can continue to ensure that these clients, many of whom are bedridden, continue to receive care. JDC has also set up hotlines and call centers in Ukraine, Moldova, and Israel. So wherever you are, you can call in and get a sense. The reason we have kind of diversified where our hotlines are is because we just don't know what the connectivity issues will be and what telecommunication will be like. And we want to make sure that these hotlines are staffed 24/7. That's really the first point of call. I'm happy to share those numbers with anybody if they're interested. People can call those numbers and get immediate assistance of where to go. If they're evacuating, what routes are best to take. Which parts of the border they should get to, because the lines might be shorter in that moment. It's really in real-time information. We are also coordinating mass displacement efforts. All of those 18 welfare centers have been converted into emergency transit hubs with supplies like food, water, mattresses, and clothing. And this is really where people can come en route to wherever else they are going to get a little bit of respite and then onto the border. Over the last few days, JDC itself has transported over 1,000 Jews, including elderly Jews, from Odessa through Moldova to Romania. And we are coordinating similar operations in Poland, Hungary, and across Europe, where JDC is also active. And then the last piece that I'll say is that we are set up at various borders, ensuring that Jews have someone to meet them at the border. Once they're met at the border, and I can go into this into more detail, we then take them into hotels, we give them food, medicine, whatever they may need. We're hearing stories in this incredibly vulnerable moment of families saying goodbye at the borders because the men cannot cross the borders. And then they come to us and we give them shelter, we give them food, and we make sure and we help them plan for what their next steps are going to be. So I'm going to stop there. Obviously, very happy to take other questions or thoughts.
So Ellie, thank you. I mean, again, it really is inspiring work, and we have a lot to cover tonight. So we would love to go into this in a lot of detail. But maybe if I can ask, just you and Alice, tell us maybe two things. For us sitting here in South Africa, we're hearing the stories and we've heard about how it's been for people to evacuate. But what does it feel like if you're on the ground and you can't get out? How, these basic things, how are people getting their cell phones charged? How are they actually surviving at the moment? I don't know, Alice, do you want to, you're nodding profusely, maybe you go first.
Yeah, absolutely. And amongst all of the international tension on those that are able to get out, we're also trying to stress, Ukraine's a country of 44 million people. We've heard from the UN that it's now over 1 million who have fled. So do the math, that's still a lot of people who have remained behind. And exactly, it's the people who can't get out and who maybe are bedridden, particularly amongst our participants, of the most vulnerable. We heard a story of a couple, the gentleman has dementia and the wife cares for them and their apartment has been shelled. Thankfully, they're safe, they're with their son now, but you can imagine what that would do to any of us, let alone an elderly client. In terms of how daily life is like, I can't even explain to you the between air raid sirens, doing what you can, a little bit like how Kim explained, coming up for a change of clothes and a shower and a phone charge. Any of the calls that I've managed to have like visually with partners has just been astounding. And we had one very emotional one with a contact in Lviv who we would ask some questions and she couldn't answer them because she would lose her composure. So it's an entirely new reality, and the resilience that we're seeing is absolutely amazing. It's very, very hard for us anywhere else to imagine that. I'll let Ellie go.
Ellie, before you go, just to pick up, if you could, just on a question that's come in is, we seem to have forgotten about COVID. What has COVID meant to the activity that's going on at the moment?
Alice, I'm happy to answer that because I do actually have a COVID answer.
Ellie. Go, Ellie, go. First for you, sorry.
Alice, we could compare notes if you want. So COVID, Omicron hit Ukraine about 2 weeks ago. When we talk about Ukraine, we talk about this being a crisis upon a crisis upon a crisis, and we've kind of forgotten about COVID in this moment. So Omicron is we know what happens with Omicron here. So we are incredibly concerned. About 34% of the Ukrainian population has been fully vaccinated. This was at least stats that were correct as of last week. It is of huge concern. And now there's populations in small confined places, in the subways, in shelters, and COVID is still rampant.
Another thing I'd add up is even other chronic diseases aside from COVID that our participants are dealing with. There's a national shortage of insulin. One of our partners' wives is diabetic, and there's no telling how long things like this will continue to impact supply chains on that front. So it's crises upon crises, and in some of the cities that are particularly barraged and cut off from supplies, that's a major concern for everyone we're working with.
So maybe just a final question. As you say, we unfortunately do need to, think about it not just today, but into the long term. So what can we do to help?
Go ahead, Ellie.
Great. The best thing that can be done right now, I'm going to be brutally honest. We need funds. we need funds. World Jewish Relief needs funds. Nonprofit organizations that you trust that are at the borders need funds. This effort is going to take tremendous financial resources. JDC is raising, just so you get a sense, $14.3 million US, which we anticipate will last for 60 days. And we actually think we're about to increase that number. We don't really need in-kind donations. It's actually very difficult to transport in-kind donations to and from borders, especially in wartime, and how do you make sure that the right products go to the right places? We need the flexibility of funds. So the best thing that you can do right now is to donate to organizations that you trust.
I'll echo that and add the addendum that yes, we want to do something, this very minute, this very hour. But the other understanding that we need from supporters and donors is that, like we've been saying, this is a long haul and there are tremendous logistical issues with getting funds. Johan talked about unavailability of ATM funds. So we're being as creative and as flexible and as immediately responsive as we can be, but understanding that everything you give helps and everything is going somewhere. Although we want to know that we're giving our money and it's immediately going to some gauze or something to some people who have suffered from shelling, but there's a lot more to it than that. On the advocacy front, there's plenty to do as well. At World Jewish Relief, we have called upon the Home Office to set up humanitarian visas or do better on the visa side of things within the UK because we're hoping to be able to get refugees here. So calling upon your leaders for more international attention. And there's a lot of media focus right now. We cannot say if that will always be the case. But for Ukraine, the need and the attention will still be there. So continuing to protest against this and shout about this is also tremendously helpful.
So Alice and Ellie, first of all, thank you for your extraordinary work. It really is, we can only say thank you on behalf of the entire Jewish world. And please do post all your links. I know I saw Ellie, you were doing it. Alice, if you can do it so people can support. And we really wish you only the very best in your endeavors. Howie, back to you.
Thanks, Sean, and thank you to Alison and Ellie. Please stay with us if you can. If you need to go, we certainly understand if you drop off the call, really at absolute your discretion. I see, Sean, a lot of people are saying, I'm a psychologist, I can help Kim, I can help with counseling as well. So if you do have any skills like that you can use, please post in the chat. We'll make sure we provide all of that information to Kim. A lot of people are sending me messages as well about your Johan's story. If you'd like to post in the chat just a message to Johan or a message to Kim, please feel free to do so. But one of the lessons, Sean, that we have is options are really important. We have South Africans who are stuck in Ukraine who have kids without a non-Ukrainian passport. And one of our sponsors tonight is in fact Endure, who are a law firm based in Lithuania. And as Ellie and Alice probably know, the South African Jewish community is primarily of Lithuanian descent, and they will help you in the process to get a second passport. And they'll be in South Africa relatively soon. So we're going to show you just a very quick advert and do a very quick poll because they'll be in South Africa, in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. If you do want a free appointment with them, you'll be able to pick up the details shortly. So let's just watch that quickly.
Oy sharmukshna kurto auge tarbalu hey ay ay kurto auge tarbalu tarbsho jalu samanu hey ay ay tarbsho jalu samanu.
So in fact, Danius will be in South Africa in April. If you would like a free consultation with him, either in Johannesburg or Cape Town, we're going to put up a poll quickly. So Britt, if you can just share the poll, please. And if you would like a free appointment with him, please just indicate there and we will provide all of that information through to Danius from Endure, who will be in South Africa shortly. So you'll see the poll is on your screen. We'll leave it up for about a minute. And the question says, would you like a free of charge consultation with Advocate Danius regarding your Lithuanian citizenship during his visit to South Africa, and he'll be in Cape Town and Johannesburg. So if you do click yes, if you're watching at the moment, we'll make sure we provide those details to you. Britt, I'm also going to ask you to put some contact details for Danius for those people who are watching on YouTube and on Facebook, so they're able to contact as well. And I see so far we're about 35, 36 people who've asked for a consultation already, and we'll leave that poll up for about another 20 seconds or so. But Sean, I think a lot of people don't actually understand the conflict itself. And so in our next section, we're going to ask Paula to please turn on her camera, and Stephen and Dzvinka to please turn on their cameras. And we're going to move into our next segment and talk about what is actually going on, what is actually happening. And Paula, I'm going to actually start with you because we chat fairly often, and we joked the other day that the one place that Russians and Ukrainians really get along is actually at the Grand Strip Club in Johannesburg.
Oh, that was off record.
Oh, sorry, you didn't tell me, but we were also talking a few days ago, and you said to me, Putin's not going to invade.
Yeah, that's true.
Did it come as a surprise to you when the invasion happened?
It was a complete surprise to me, but it wasn't just to me. I mean, for those of you who are listening and watching, I work with Russian television, and we can get to that in a moment. But with all my colleagues here in Moscow, it was a surprise for everybody. I even have a sense that it was a surprise for the Russian leadership. Right up until the moment that he sent his troops into Ukraine, we were running, and the message coming out of the Kremlin was that this is in defense to what they have called separatists in Eastern Ukraine, people in Eastern Ukraine who have Russian ethnic background, who for the last 8 years have been living under the fire of Kiev, and who Putin kept responding to and saying, we will come to your assistance. And most of us understood that assistance of literally coming there and helping them, and potentially trying to create some kind of ceasefire with the firing, but not actually to go all the way to Kiev. It was a surprise for everybody.
So Paula, what do we understand now? Okay. What is Putin's end game? What does he want to achieve?
Okay, well, firstly, what I know is I don't know what he wants to achieve. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned in the last week, it's that we certainly can't understand what goes on in his head. The arguments coming out of Moscow are such. Firstly, you have these people who live in East Ukraine. Now, I cannot go to Ukraine at the moment because I have a banning order for 5 years, and it will only expire in 2 years. That's because during the last war, I reported in Ukraine, and working for Russian media, they've banned all of us. Having said that, I did spend in the last war a lot of time in Eastern Ukraine, and the fears of people there are very, very real. They want to be part of Russia, and after that war subsided, and in the years until this war, they have been under military fire from Ukraine. So I understand that part of Putin's motivation, I'm not saying I agree with it, and I want to put that out quite clearly, Howard, because for all the hate mail and death threats I get with people saying, how can I support the Russian point of view? I'm not saying I support the Russian point of view. I'm just explaining the Russian point of view, okay? And we can have that as a different conversation. But what Putin is arguing is that the way to stop that kind of firing happening in Eastern Ukraine, my understanding is that he believes he has to demilitarize the whole of Ukraine. Again, it was a surprise to me on a personal level, but that would be his justification. So he sent his troops into Kiev, and the idea is to completely destroy any kind of military installation in Ukraine. So if you listen to the comments coming out of the Russian Defense Ministry, it's that they're targeting specific military. Now, I know all of us have a question mark over my next statement, but the Russian government claims that it's the Ukrainians who are putting their people, if you like the term, human shields, where the military installations are, and hence they're blaming the Ukrainian government for those kind of civilian killings. Different conversation, but Putin is saying that we are trying to bring Ukraine to its knees in terms of its military capability. The other point that they keep stressing here is, and I think this is a fair point that people need to be aware of, is that for years, the Russian government, especially Putin, has said, why is NATO expanding in the former Soviet Union space? NATO was set up in 1949 to defend the Western world against Russia. So you have now a complete encroachment. When that Cold War ended in 1990, 1991, you would imagine that with the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, NATO would have been dissolved as well. And actually there was a speech by Putin, if any of you heard it, that was quite surprising about, I think it was about a week ago, the week seems to have been very long, in which he confided that he had actually once asked the American President Bill Clinton if Russia could be part of NATO, and Clinton had said no. The idea being, why can people understand why Russia questions why the West needs NATO if up until this week we had a situation that the Cold War presumably didn't exist anymore? And so Putin's argument is, well, you know, if we're friends and there's no Cold War and we disbanded the Warsaw Pact, why, number one, is there a NATO? And number two, why is NATO encroaching on former Soviet states right up to the Russian border? Now, the argument again is obviously countries are independent, they can choose what they want in their borders. But just to be sensitive to the Russian argument that Ukraine is on Russia's border, and you had military exercises on the Russian-Ukrainian border. And so from Putin's point of view, he legitimizes it by saying that this is a real security threat for him. And perhaps just following on from that, maybe Putin wants to show what kind of shambles NATO is in, because I think if there's one thing, and again, you know, we've been disproven before, but if there's one thing that the Russians and the Ukrainians perhaps agree on, it's that neither side expects NATO to physically enter this conflict and for this to become a full-scale World War III, or at least that's the hope.
So, Paula, the Budapest Agreement, which was the agreement where Ukraine gave up one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine, in fact, had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And Russia at that point in time guaranteed the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And since then, we've seen them invade and, in fact, annex Crimea. We've seen them support Russian separatists in the Donbas region and try to carve out areas of the Ukraine, and we've now seen a full-scale invasion. Now, the other signatories to that agreement who guaranteed the Ukrainian borders and sovereignty were the United States and the UK. That would give them complete and utter right to go in and bomb Moscow. Moscow is in breach of that agreement. So now, surely, when you've given up your nuclear weapons and the West has guaranteed, in fact, your sovereignty, and you're invaded, in fact, the West is dealing very lightly with Putin. He deserves much worse.
I'm thinking about what you say. I would go back to the arguments again. I mean, I don't really know what is going on in the Russian government's headspace. I can tell you what's going on in the public here, as I'm trying to think how to get my head around how to answer you. The Russian public is divided. It's estimated that it's between 50 and 50 or 50 and 75, meaning that 75% potentially support this operation, and 50-50, it's that you have half who support and half who don't. Those who supported have a very strong tie to Ukraine. So yes, they gave up their nuclear equipment, but you had that whole topic of nuclear coming back on the agenda just a few days ago when Putin put his nuclear armaments on high alert. And that was out of fear that they felt that the other side was going to use nuclear deterrence or any kind of nuclear weaponry against them. And that was a major headline here in Moscow. And it was perceived differently to how it was perceived in the Western media. It was perceived in Russia as a reaction to threats that were coming out of the West. Having said that, there's people, if you can understand, it's not like the pictures coming out of Ukraine are horrendous, and people here are sensitive to that. I mean, I go into my newsroom, everybody's down. Everybody is depressed. Russians have family who live in Ukraine. They have friends who live in Ukraine. They have friends and family who live in the United States and Europe. And many people here feel that they're again going to become the pariah of the world. As I had a young Russian colleague saying to me, in the last few years, she's managed to travel the world and feel a part of the international community, and that what's happened in 1 week is going to change the future of Russia forever. And whether Russia, I mean, no one here has any clue what's going to happen. Is it going to lead people? Okay, so people here do tell me that Putin is going to succeed militarily. That he has a much stronger army, obviously, than Ukraine. They don't believe that NATO, as much as you say the US and the Europeans have a right to come in and get involved, no one believes they will. No one believes that they will really get involved to the extent that you'll have this third world war. Having said that, though, there is a sense here that anything could happen. Some people have even posed me the scenario that you could have enough people coming out to the streets that it could lead to some kind of revolution. That's not a popular feeling here. The main feeling is that Putin will succeed militarily. I've been told that it will take up until the summer. Again, it's all speculation. The question, of course, is in that time period, what happens to his support base? And in that time period, how does the world change? Howard, can I just mention a few other things? Because there were a few just thoughts I wanted to share with people. And again, please, I'm not defending Russia's position. It's just questions I'm posing to all of us. I've reported from all the major wars in the last 15 years. And yet, I haven't got the same kind of death threats that I've got over this war. So Russia was involved in Syria. I went to Syria, I risked my life, I did whatever a war correspondent does in that situation. I didn't have people emailing me and telling me they want to kill me. Now I have people emailing me and telling me they want to kill me. What was different between what Russia was doing in Syria and what Russia's doing in Ukraine? Another thought to put out there is when NATO bombed Serbia back in the former Yugoslavia war. I go to Serbia today, I'm seen as a star because they hate the Americans there, they hate the Europeans. But none of us had this massive outcry against NATO in terms of the way it behaved then. Is that not then a double standard? Again, I'm not justifying the Russian position. I'm just saying how complicated and how, I saw the comment that someone posted, how do I defend working for a Russian channel? I'm in a really difficult position, and these are the kind of questions going through my mind. Western media this week has given glowing reports of Ukrainians making homemade Molotov cocktails. But if we had to see pictures of Palestinians with homemade Molotov cocktails, or if we had to see pictures of Iraqis with homemade Molotov cocktails, we'd probably use the word terrorist, So, and there's a feeling here in Russia that I want you to understand, that there's a strong Russophobia around the world. Not every Russian here is supporting Putin. Many of them are afraid to come out into the streets. And my heart goes out to my colleagues and friends that I work with. I have another passport. Please God, they won't close the airspace between Russia and South Africa and I can come back. I might not have a job, but I can come back. What happens to people living in Russia who the only passport they have is Russian and the Russian ruble is at its lowest level ever? People have been queuing up in ATMs trying to get money. There's not enough jobs and food to begin with. And the last point I wanted to make out is some of my colleagues in the Arab world pointing out double standards when they say, when Syrians were fleeing the Syrian civil war, you never saw the same kind of, the world reacted, but not to the extent that we see in Ukraine. And parallel to that, you didn't see European countries opening their arms to refugees coming in from Africa and the Middle East in the way that you see them opening their arms to Ukrainians. Now, I know you can argue that Ukrainians are in Europe. I'm just giving you a sense of some of the concerns, some of the questions and the things that people are struggling with.
Paula, tell us what it's like on the streets of Moscow at the moment. If you go for a walk, are people concerned? Is this the only topic of discussion? What are people saying?
The truth is most people don't speak English and my Russian is rather limited. So it's not like I walk along the streets and, are saying hi, hi, hi. Life like it is, I have found whenever I'm in a war zone, as much as, we heard the story from Johan, but there are huge places of a country that's in war that life carries on like normal. Now, certainly in Moscow, life is normal. This is the number one conversation. It's all that people talk about, but life carries on like normal. You have, in my organization, which is Russian State TV, you have a lot of resignations. You've had a lot of young Russians, which I haven't been able to get my head around, quitting from the station because they're afraid. And I'm not quite sure why they're afraid, because they are Russian, they live in Russia and they work in Russia. So they're presumably afraid of any future opportunities that they'll get. I've had a lot of British colleagues resigning because their families live in the UK and their families are being physically threatened because they work for a Russian channel. So there is that mixture of fear, there's that mixture of concern. And I think the overall feeling that I pick up here is that sense that this last week has changed the future of Russia forever, and Russians feeling that they're really going to be, again, the pariah of the world. I just jotted down one or two stories I wanted to share with you. I don't think the Russian army was prepared for this. I'm not a militarist. And I just say it based on a few conversations I had. One story shared with me that there was video posted of Ukrainian soldiers that had captured a Russian military convoy. I'm not quite sure what it was. And they filmed themselves opening up those ready-to-eat packs from the Russian army. And the food expired back in 2015. I think the number of Russian casualties is much higher than the Russian media is reporting. I don't know if it's accurate in the Western media, but I think a lot of the pictures we're seeing are also Russian soldiers, young soldiers who are dying on the front lines, and pictures of them being burnt. And there was a story, I met a woman, I went to go and buy some bread, and luckily she spoke English, and she told me that her son had been called up for military exercises. And he managed a few days ago to phone her and say, Mom, we've gone and done these military exercises, and we were just told exactly that they were exercises, and only later did we realize that we were actually inside Ukraine. So there's some real questions also being asked here within the parameters of this being Putin's Moscow and Putin's Russia, of just why are there so many Russian losses that are not being reported? We know why they're not being reported on, but why are there so many Russian losses? And there is a sense, again, with people I talk to, but it's also a sense that's coming out of the Western media, is that maybe Putin thought that this war would be over much quicker than it was. Maybe he's met with more resistance than he thought he would. He is a very clever strategist. I would find it hard to believe that he hadn't painted this scenario in terms of the West reacting the way it did. I don't think he would find that a surprise, but I have no insight, and I'm not in his headspace in terms of how he plans to deal with that, because my channel, RT, was set up to explain Russia to the world. 1 week has completely destroyed the future of this channel. The world doesn't care what Russia thinks. And Putin's, pours billions into his media. So it just seems like a miscalculation, and yet the Russian president is clever. So would he really have made such a miscalculation?
Well, I'm sure Sean has a question. Just before he answers the question, can I recommend this book for people to read? It's called The New Tsar. It was a gift to me by Neil Novick. The New Tsar, The Rise and Reign of Vladimir Putin. Really, I think, crucial reading for anyone who's watching tonight. Sorry, Sean.
No, thanks. That is a fantastic book. So I have read it. Paula, maybe two questions from me, or sort of framed by the audience. The one is, what internet access, what news is the average Russian consuming? I mean, we're overwhelmed with some of the stuff Howie showed in the beginning. Is that accessible in Russia would be the first question. And then if you don't mind, because a lot of people have posed the question, how are you feeling personally? Are you scared? How do you feel about appearing on this webinar? If you feel comfortable. If you don't, please don't answer that.
Firstly, let me answer the second question first. Firstly, thank you for, I've received death threats, and at the same time, I've received messages of support. So I really do appreciate the messages of support. And I completely appreciate people thinking that I've made the wrong decision to stay in them with the Russian TV. I'm completely open to that too. I'm grappling with it. It really is a very difficult time for me. I would hate to think that I have become the kind of journalist that, in inverted commas, justifies the kind of actions that are happening across the border in Ukraine. So yes, I'm grappling with it, but I think part of that answer would be, well, I saw what the Russian government did in Syria, and I stayed with the government, and people didn't call on me for, I get death threats all the time. That's the one consistency. So what? The decision will be which war is the most important war for me in terms of the death threats. I get death threats in terms of what's perceived to be pro-Israel coverage, to the point that it's really dangerous for me to go to Lebanon now. But then I don't get death threats, but I certainly get a lot of people in the Jewish communities around the world who feel that Russia today is very critical of Israel and too pro-Palestinian. So it opens itself to this massive arena of, it's hard to be a journalist in today's world because there are so many different viewpoints and so many conflicting opinions. And I also don't believe that there's anything as true objective media. Now, granted, working for a Russian state-owned channel is very specific. But I keep going back to the answer. And for the moment, it feels the right answer, that I do think there's value in knowing how the Russian government is thinking. if only so you can understand, in inverted commas, your enemy. You know, our channel's been banned, but what have we been reporting on? We've been reporting on what the Kremlin says, the statements, the estimates being made by the defense ministry, how Russians are suffering, how ordinary Russians around the world, you have Russian composers and an opera singer, and I'm talking here about Russians in the United States who've now been cut out of international appearances because they didn't come out in public and criticize Putin. I'm not sure that it's fair to demand that from everybody, you know, whether people are scared or whether maybe some people actually think his actions are right. You might not think they're right, I might not think they're right, but he's got at least 50%, if not 75% of the population supporting him. So I am conflicted and I appreciate the questions. And if people have a more definite kind of answer, it certainly is something that I'm struggling with. I'm just trying to think. Oh, I also wanted to make the point, I think in banning my channel, it is a slippery slope. I think you start, this is going to be the future. The future is about public perception and how publics view battles. I'm talking about the information warfare. I think it's going to be less and less about what's happening on the actual field and more about what's happening in the public arena and the public sphere. I don't think the right answer is to ban the channel because you think it's purporting propaganda or it's disseminating lies. It's disseminating what the Russian government thinks. You might not agree with it. Do I know the right way to deal with it? No, because I think this is like uncharted territory. I think we're entering into a world that we haven't been in before, where you have a plethora of ideas and different opinions. And how are we going to deal with all of those without feeling that they're fueling the conflict? My real struggle as a journalist is not even necessarily this particular conflict. My struggle is I became a journalist because I wanted to, in inverted commas, change the world. That's how you feel when you're a naive Joburg Jewish girl at the age of 18. All these years later, I feel that as a journalist, we contribute to the conflicts more. I think we give an opportunity for people to exacerbate what's going on the ground. I don't think I necessarily bring resolution. So that's just some of the things I'm struggling with. And your first question was, the media that Russians get. The state media is very much like the channel I work for. So the state media will very much be what the Russian government thinks. But of course, you have Facebook. You have millions of images. Russia has lost this war in the public arena. Whether Russia wins this war militarily or not, it's lost the war in terms of how people perceive it. So round the clock, Russians are looking at the video clips that come out of Ukraine, and they see all the videos you see plus more of Ukrainians being killed, of mothers and children being separated. They see all of that. They see all of that. So they know perfectly what's going on, and then it's not that the internet's been closed down. If anything, the internet's been closed down in the rest of the world in terms of the Russian broadcasting. But it will be interesting to see how it affects Putin's ratings in the long run. Like I say, for the moment, he's okay here.
So we're going to take a 2-minute ad break. Security is obviously top of everyone's mind. So we're going to have a 2-minute ad break, and then we're going to come back with Stephen to help explain some of this conflict and what it's really about. And Dzvinka, I know you've disagreed with a huge amount of what Paula said, and we want to give you carte blanche to be able to express your view and contradict. And that's why we love these webinars, because we're a platform for free thought and ideas. I think almost everyone watching this is very much supporting the Ukrainian side, but it doesn't mean to say we don't listen to all sides of the story as well. So we're going to be having a quick advert from Mantis Security, who are one of the big sponsors of our webinar series, and we'll run a poll on that. And we're going to come back, speak to Stephen, Dzvinka, and Paula, also give you one more say. So security is really top of mind, I think, for everyone at this point in time. Britt, you're going to put up a poll very quickly. If you are interested in getting some services from Mantis, the poll is on your screen at the moment. It says, would you like Mantis Security to contact you for a free risk assessment for your security needs? And that could be for your home or your business or your institution. So if so, please answer the poll that's on your screen now. And while you do that, Stephen Gruzd, you've been sitting there really quietly for the last hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Steve, what on earth is actually happening?
So I hope you can hear me. I'm having bandwidth trouble. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sorry about that. Firstly, I just want to say, I've done a lot of media over the last week. I said I haven't been as busy as this since Robert Mugabe died. But really listening to the stories and the work that's being done at the raw edge of this conflict is absolutely amazing. I'm very humbled by what I have heard tonight. I mean, this conflict is about, for me, Vladimir Putin trying to reverse the result of the Cold War. It's, for me, naked aggression against a sovereign state with respect to what Paula said. It's massive firepower being brought to bear, and the longer he takes to take Ukraine, or the bits of Ukraine that he wants, the more firepower is introduced. I think that, as President Macron said today, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. And this is a violation of sovereignty. It's a violation of territorial integrity, and it's just unfolding, as Paula said, on our screens and on our phones. And war is being fought on Twitter as well. And absolutely, I agree that Ukraine is winning the war on electronic devices and the propaganda war at the moment. And we're not sure what's happening. I mean, most people have said that his end game is probably to create a land bridge to the the Crimea, which has been annexed to Russia, not recognized by many states in the world. But it doesn't have a land bridge to Russia proper. So that's one of the objectives. I mean, Putin's talking about denazifying Ukraine, and I think for members of the Jewish community, I don't know if you're as sickened by that as I am, but it's just, for me, low, despicable nonsense to accuse the Ukrainian government of being Nazis. I just, the president and the prime minister are Jewish, for one thing, but it just doesn't gel with reality. It's just a desperate thing. And, I also disagree with a number of things that Paul has said. Well, for one thing, NATO has been on Russia's borders since NATO was formed in 1949. Norway joined in 1949, and Norway shares 196 kilometers with Russia. So the fact that, yes, of course, it has expanded over the years, but it has been on Russia's border before. So again, I think that's a spurious argument. And so the one thing is the land bridge, and the second is that he's probably going to want to install a puppet government in Ukraine that's going to be abandon any hope of joining NATO, abandon any hope of joining the European Union, and will be a government like they have in Belarus at the moment that will let Russia use their country as a launching pad, etc., etc. So I'm also depressed. I'm also worried and concerned and horrified by what I've been seeing.
Steve, you run the Russia-Africa project for the South African Institute of International Affairs. Should the countries like Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, should they be nervous?
I think they should be. I mean, they've always been in a very precarious position. They faced cyber attacks from originating in Russia. They've had a lot of criticism. I mean, but they are NATO members. So I think that if Putin would expand the war to those countries, NATO would have to get involved, because Article 5 of the NATO Charter says an attack on one is an attack on all. They have 30 members of NATO, 28 of which are in Europe. And so I think they are rightly nervous. I was speaking to a diplomat from one of the Nordic countries today, and they're very nervous. It's been and she said it's a pacifist country. We don't believe in militarism, but they are nervous. But that would take it really into World War III, honestly, if that was how it progressed.
And Steve, I want to talk about South Africa and South Africa's reaction, because in the last 7 days, as the invasion was happening, we saw deputy cabinet ministers and members of the South African National Defence Force at the Russian consulate in Cape Town. While they were busy invading, they were busy toasting the Russian army. And then comes this vote at the United Nations, and we abstain from a vote criticizing Russia at the United Nations. And then 2 Russian nuclear jets, bombers, arrive in South Africa this week as well. What the hell is wrong with our country?
So in the run-up to the war, DIRCO, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, was stum, didn't say very much. On the 23rd of February, they issued a statement. So this is the day before the war, calling on both sides to desist, saying the world doesn't need a war, and just saying that there must be negotiation and we must follow the Minsk process. Then the war happens in the early hours of the 24th, and DIRCO issues a second statement, very unusually, 24 hours later, which says Russia must withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and goes on to talk about we believe in peace and we believe in dialogue. Then the president was apparently unhappy with this statement, and in his public speeches and remarks, said that this is the UN's baby, this is what the UN was created for, and this is what the UN must mediate. Then we go to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and Minister Pandor talks about this, but it's very oblique. So the fact that Russia was named in that, named, not only named, but blamed, in that second DIRCO statement, then was walked back, as the Americans like to say, and said, no, this is our BRICS partner, and we must take into account the Russian security fears, and so forth. And then, indeed, so it goes to the Security Council, where there are 15 members. 3 of them are from Africa on a rotational basis. They don't have a veto. Those 3 countries were Kenya, Gabon, and Ghana, all of whom spoke out very strongly, especially Kenya, that this is basically a colonial war. This is what we fought in Africa, and we are seeing a country trying to colonize another country, just in very crude terms. But that resolution in the Security Council did not pass because Russia vetoed, and India, China, and the UAE abstained. So then it went to the floor of the General Assembly, where there are 193 member countries. 141 of them voted to condemn Russia. And if you read the statement, and I actually posted it on my Twitter from Al Jazeera, it's a very tough statement. South Africa was one of the 35 countries that abstained. And then we gave reasons for our abstention. Interestingly, the reasons don't mention Russia once in the statement. It's not mentioned. But we say this was procedurally not done properly because there wasn't enough consultation with the members of the United Nations. It doesn't take into account everybody's security fears. And we just didn't think that the wording of it and the timing of it were correct when it went to the floor. So only 6 countries voted against the General Assembly resolution, if I can remember: Eritrea, Russia, Syria, North Korea, and I can't remember. I think
South Sudan, if I remember.
South Sudan, I think. No, there was only one African country, but not important. South Africa was among 35 countries that couldn't bring themselves to vote for what seems to me, as an observer, an egregious abrogation of everything South Africa holds dear. And part of this is, I think, our closeness to Russia. The point was made in the Jewish Report this week. You can say a lot about our government and the ruling party, but when they're your friend for a very long time. They, whatever they will dismiss a number of sins.
Murder, rape, pillage. It doesn't care if you're Cuba or Russia. We still love you.
So and I think South Africa has been hasn't really wanted to be put on the spot, has been very awkward about it. This statement on the 24th was almost a blip, and then we're back to business as usual. And interesting, I was talking to a colleague today who was saying India also abstained, but India is in a very different position geographically. If Russia gets weakened, China automatically gets strengthened. And it feels very, very vulnerable in that region. It's got Pakistan on the one side, it's got China on the other side, both of whom it fears. So the BRICS alliance is really going to be tested. What was interesting was that in the General Assembly vote, Russia voted against the resolution. South Africa, China, and India abstained, but Brazil, interestingly enough, voted for the resolution. So there's a lot of geopolitics going on here. There's a lot of factors that go into a country's position. But I think we're starting to see the comments in South Africa how appalled many citizens are. But what I will say is that there's also a strong element of population in Africa that does see this as hypocritical, that does see this as the West encroaching, that does see this as NATO's fault, that does see how the Americans went into Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan and created a huge disaster in those countries and left Afghanistan with their tail between their legs and people being blown up at the airport in ignominy. And that America has not been called out in the way that Russia has been called out. And there's a feeling that if you are not supporting, if you're not against that what America does in the world deserves to be criticized, and whoever's going to criticize America, therefore, my enemy's enemy is my friend, basically. So it's been a very trying, difficult, but interesting week for a political scientist.
So, Steve, if you can answer this question very, very quickly, and then we're going to move to Dzvinka. The Budapest Agreement, where Britain, UK, Russia, Belarus, all in fact agreed to Ukraine's sovereignty and to guarantee Ukrainian borders. That's been abrogated. In return for that, Ukraine gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. In fact, when they gave it up, Ukraine had more nuclear weapons than the United Kingdom, China, and France combined. That's what they gave up in return for the guarantee of their borders and their sovereignty. Surely the world should act.
I think the talk has been much more about NATO than it has about the Budapest Agreement. And the fact that Ukraine is not a NATO member, and therefore there's no obligation for NATO to defend it. So that the Budapest Agreement is not really talked about. As I say, I think it's almost over-trumped by the whole NATO question. I haven't seen it much in the discourse, but yeah, I mean, Ukraine could be asking the question of all of those guarantors of that particular agreement, what now?
What now? Dzvinka, you've sat there really patiently. Please as well, Sean is waiting anxiously for all your questions to come in. So please use the Q&A button on Zoom, use the chat functionality on YouTube and Facebook, post questions to our panelists. I know we've been going for a long time. Dzvinka, just tell us, the Ukrainian community in South Africa, how big is it?
So we've done the study in 2020, and the estimated number of Ukrainians in South Africa, according to stats, is about 6,000 Ukrainians. But our feeling is that probably it's a little bit manipulated with the visa status. So those people who have temporal visa for 2 years would be counted as those that stay in the country permanently. So our rough estimate is about 3,500–4,000 of Ukrainians in South Africa, predominantly in Cape Town, Joburg, and Durban.
Do you still have family and friends in Ukraine, and what are they busy telling you at the moment?
Yes, so my parents are in Kiev, and as we speak, I received messages that there is air attacks and more explosions. So obviously, it's really difficult to listen to all the speeches when you know what is happening on the ground and what the country has went through in the last 7 days. But I'll try not to talk about personal, because that's going to get quite emotional. So I'll try to focus on the academic conversation.
No, we like personal. We like, people understand and relate to personal issues. And that's why we asked that question, because if you explain to us what your family is going through, as hard as it is, I think that's what really touches a nerve with people.
Maybe I'll start with what Putin wants and whether we expected him to invade. I think Putin wants to economic control over Ukraine. This was the reason why Russia was involved in election manipulation in 2003, when Yanukovych was trying to become a president. And I was in Ukraine at that time. I'm in South Africa for the last 11 years. But in 2003, 2004, I was in Ukraine. So we witnessed that massive pressure of what was happening on the ground, with falsification when bulletins were thrown, like packs of bulletins for Yanukovych were thrown into the voting boxes, and how the information space was manipulated. One candidate would be cut out of the meeting. So if there is a meeting and both candidates are present in the news, you would see only one candidate. And this is a great example of what Russia today is doing as well. When you don't present what is the situation, but you present the position of Russian government, how the Russian government wants to see. So when it didn't work with the election, Putin tried again in 2010 and it worked. And in this case, I guess, democracy in Ukraine is not as strong as we would like to be. It's still growing democracy. There are lots of mistakes that are linked to weak institutions, and Russia also has other methods of influence. One of them is information. So if you look at our elections from 1991 to 2014, the key topic would be the division on language, where one candidate would be portrayed as pro-EU and the other candidate would be portrayed as pro-Russian. While in practice, this is not the divide, but this is a card that is easy to play in a society where you can create the divide. So roughly a year before the elections, the tension would be starting to push in. Oh, there's a pro-Russian, there's a pro-Ukrainian, and that's how the politics was manipulated. And it's the same like in South Africa, the card of race is manipulated by all the politicians. Not all, but by many. So in 2013, when Putin saw that Yanukovych didn't manage to control the protests and ran away, Putin decided to implement the military invasion. And I think Russia today played a very big role in hiding the truth about what was happening on the ground. Because in practice, a lot of military forces landed in Crimea. The parliament was surrounded with people with guns, and the vote for parliament, even Crimea, is very pro-Russian, and I agree that there is lots of sentiments, but it's this militarization that made this referendum to happen. In the eastern part of Ukraine, this obviously was not possible because there was no military fleet and no 20,000 of military people on the ground. So if we listen to the interviews of Russian citizens, probably linked to FSB, those who came and started a separatist movement in the east of Ukraine, they all say that what happened in Crimea was possible because of strong military presence. But people on the ground were not prepared to take a gun and to fight. So I think Russia today played a massive role. When UN report 2014-2016, which I posted in comments, here clearly says that there is Russian military presence that is behaving very violently. This was not reported in Russian news. This information was hidden. If we talk about the news should be objective. In that conflict between Eastern Ukraine and Russian separatists, we are talking about 14 to 15,000 of Ukrainians shot during the period of 2014-2022. So this is massive implications. It's 1.5 million of internally displaced people. Those are people who lost their houses. I'm in touch with many of those who had to leave their houses, everything they had inside their houses in Donetsk, and flee to other parts of Ukraine. And of course, yeah, I can see the comments, nobody is objective, but Russia today has been part of Russian information system, which drives disinformation, like the famous case of crucified child, the famous cases of the taking down the MH17. This is an open disinformation, manipulating of people's perception. So if Putin's main goal was economy of Ukraine, he played against himself when he started that conflict in 2014 and took eastern part of Ukraine. What happened? A majority of pro-Russian population was occupied. Then the other part of Ukraine, which was not under Russian occupation, turned more pro-Western. So in just 1 month, between February 2014 and March 2014, the perception of NATO has transformed. When previously, most of Ukrainians would be thinking about NATO negatively, in March 2014, after Russian invasion, majority of Ukrainians would be pro-NATO. Why? Because this is the only way how Ukraine can protect himself from NATO.
Dzvinka,
So,
can I ask a question? If you were put in front of Durko tomorrow, say Naledi Pandor invited you for lunch, what would you actually say to the South African government?
I have a very clear message. I would say, South Africa, you have strong values. South Africa has been built on the values of sovereignty, democracy, human rights. This is what Ukraine is defending today, and this is what it's fighting for freedom, for democracy, for human rights, for being Ukrainians. In Putin's head, if you are Ukrainian, you are a Nazi, you are a nationalist. For 300 years, as we heard in the first news clip that you've put at the beginning, Russia was trying to colonize Ukraine. Prohibited language from the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. This is like a lot of killed people. We talk about Holodomor, which took 3 to 7 million of Ukrainians, and which has not been spoken in the Soviet Union, and it was criminal offense to talk about that. And I think here, as a Jewish Report, a platform that unites Jewish people, you know what a trauma it is when so many people from your nation died. And imagine that you would not be even allowed to talk about that. Not saying that Germany would say sorry. Russia has never said sorry. They're continuing to deny it. So in South Africa, from South African point of view, it's very clear where to stand with Ukraine or with Russia if you read your constitution. But obviously, if you are looking from the Putin point of view, that Putin's structure is built on money, wanted to control Ukraine for money, here controlling South Africa also through funds, through funding political parties, through running disinformation campaigns in South Africa. So we can understand why that message is not so clear. The question is to people of South Africa, how you want to see your country.
So
do you want the country to stay with the constitution or with Putin's money? And I think once you can answer that question, everything becomes clear.
Yeah, it's a clear moral choice.
It is a moral choice, but you know, it's also heavy economic choice. Because for me, there is no doubt that for Putin, the only way out is a Hague criminal court. For if you take into account how many civilians, children have been killed, including relatives from our community in South Africa have been killed on the ground. So if you take all the destroyed houses, kindergartens, schools, hospitals, like bombed beautiful cities, what Russia claimed they are part of Kiev and Rus, now those beautiful churches, old buildings, everything been bombed. So I don't know, I think we clearly see Putin is going the same road as Hitler did, and there is no other future for Russia. And I understand maybe Russian people were manipulated. Maybe Russia Today journalists were manipulated, but it doesn't change the consequences. And consequences are pain of 43 million people that are suffering every single hour as we speak. We heard the story of John at the beginning and how traumatic it was. Now imagine if you're not flying home, if that is your home and your home has been bombed.
And that is in fact the story of your parents.
Yeah, they're in Kiev. We've discussed 3 weeks before the war started. We've actually spoke with them, and I asked them to move to the west of the country. We have a holiday house there that they could stay safe, but they said, we spent our life fighting for this independence. I remember very clearly before the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1989, 1999, how much pressure it was, how much persecution was on those people who would be fighting for independence. We talk about people who were spending 27 years, like Mandela, in prison for just thinking about autonomy of Ukraine. And this is not one person, so many, multiple people that were repressed and suppressed because they were dreaming about Ukrainian independence. My parents also were one of those. One night we woke up with my brother and sister and there were no parents because they were suddenly in a prison. Luckily, they managed to get out and we were not left by ourselves. But I remember this time. And before the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was also that feeling that, nobody knows everything and everybody supports the Communist Party. And I feel Chernobyl accident transformed it. Suddenly, everybody started to question the reality that they've been told because it was so different from reality that they lived. I think this is the moment that Russia is living through now. And there is no other way than all Russian people suddenly waking up like from a bad dream and realizing that Litvinenko didn't die for nothing, being poisoned. Then Magnitsky didn't die for nothing in the prison. Then Khodorkovsky didn't spend 10 years in prison for nothing. There are hundreds and hundreds of people killed so that they can continue believing Russia Today and other Russian propaganda, living in the fake world. They're going to realize that what is happening in Ukraine is their reality, and that pain that all Ukrainians feel today is their guilt because they didn't stand up.
Dzvinka, I'm going to stop you there. We've got 5 minutes before we have to wrap up. Sean, I know you've got some questions for some of the other panelists. I'm going to ask everyone to please answer really, really quickly so we can try in the last 5 minutes to get through as much as we can, please.
So thank you. Steve, 2 quick questions. The first is, can you talk about Israel's position? And the second, how are China looking at things, particularly with regard to Taiwan?
So Israel's position, from what I understand, is playing a dual game. That the Prime Minister Bennett has been quite quiet about it, and Yair Lapid, who's the foreign minister, has been quite vocal in support of Ukraine. Israel has actually sent, as it often does in these kinds of situations, teams in for humanitarian help. There have been protests in Israel, and there's been a lot of talk in the media. And in fact, believe it or not, Israel has been suggested from some quarters as a possible mediator because it has good relations with with Ukraine and with Russia. I think Netanyahu met Putin over 30 times during his time in office. So there was a closeness there. So I think, but it's also a society that's struggling with this being confronted by this. What was the second question? Oh, China. I think China's watching this very closely. It's interesting that it also didn't decide to veto in the Security Council. It chose to abstain because it knew Russia was going to veto the resolution. But I think it is looking at how this is going to play out, and it does, of course, have designs on Taiwan, which it sees as a breakaway province and is threatened to move on it. I think we'll have to wait to see what happens in Ukraine to see how China is emboldened. But China is a rising power, make no mistake about that, and it is very close to Russia politically.
Steve, thanks. Paula, can I ask you two questions that have come from the audience? The one is Navalny, where's he been, and his supporters through this conflict? And the second, do Russia have the resources to see this conflict out and international sanctions for months on end?
Depends who you ask. And let me start. Well, the first question I don't really know the answer to. Sorry, I can't comment. The second question, it depends who you ask. Again, like, you know, there are people who'll tell me that Putin is a very clever strategist, and he would have known all the scenarios, and he wouldn't have done this, bearing in mind that this could potentially have this impact on his economy if he didn't think he could withstand it. You had the Central Bank of Russia issuing a statement urging people not to take their money out of the ATMs, that there was enough money inside. There was enough money in the country. No one really knows. It really just depends who you ask, because it is one of the stories that I've been focusing on here, is the economic impact and whether Putin will survive. And I've heard both points of view. I think actually there's no conclusive answer this side either.
Dzvinka, can I ask the question? A few times, and we heard the report from Johan about people of color, Arabs, Africans, even Asians, being discriminated against by Ukrainian border guards, sometimes beaten. What is actually happening there?
We've actually looked into it, and it's a multiple factor. First of all, like massive humanitarian crisis and a lot of pressure on the border. Secondly, a delay in response from African countries. We've looked at like multiple countries, and obviously depending on how each country's government reacted and how fast they could negotiate the visa-free regime for those who could cross the border, because obviously immediately after the conflict, African nationals that are not allowed to, you couldn't travel through the border. So there was a problem with that. There is also lots of people who are staying illegally, that are coming stayed illegally on the territory of Ukraine with the idea to get the documents in Ukraine and move to European Union. So there is already that animosity, because we remember what was happening with the Belarusian border and EU. So obviously the situation on the border was tense. Ukraine generally has criminalized racism, so this is a protected issue. And but obviously, when there is so much pressure, those who are marginalized, those who are different, would get into more difficult situation. I can tell how the government reacted. On the 28th of February, they issued a statement in response to that program and created a special corridor for the foreigners, because the other issue was, as both Johan and Kim was explaining, that Ukrainian men are not allowed to leave, so women and children are prioritized to be evacuated. So obviously, male would be disadvantaged in this situation, because only women and children would be allowed through the border first. But we've also had multiple statements from people of color in Ukraine. For example, Olympic champion and MP of Ukrainian parliament, whose father is Rwandan, made a statement that Ukraine is not doesn't have a pressing racial issues, and we shouldn't replace the situation with the war was a normal situation. Also, if you look at the Kharkiv neonatal place, we can see that the Nigerian moms and Ukrainian moms are delivering their babies in the bomb shelters together in the same circumstances, and the same doctors are not sleeping for 48 hours. And those babies are all born to the sounds of Russian missiles.
And in fact, Dzvinka, we just heard that Sumy is busy being bombed at the moment, and that is where Rebbetzin Rochi Levitansky was going to join us this evening, and she tried to log in a few times. She appeared to be in the dark with very limited internet. Our thoughts, our minds, our souls, our hope go out to the people of Ukraine. May they be blessed with safety. May they be blessed with freedom. May all your families and friends survive. And I think we say as well, there are young Russian kids who are fighting as well, who don't know what they're doing, who are following orders and instructions, who often just don't know. It is a time like this that the world has to come together and put an end to the violence and the war. It is not in the interests of our society that something like this happens in the year 2022. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us this evening. Paula, you've taken so much flack, but you're never one to shy away from anything, and that is one of the reasons why I love you so much. I said to Paula earlier, she's looking thin. She thought that was a compliment. I was thinking she should go get some real food. She's clearly enormously stressed. Dzvinka, to your family, please give us all the love. To people like Kim, who's spending her days and nights trying to help the South Africans going out there. To Steve, who's helping us understand what's happening in the real world. And to Sean, thank you for co-hosting this evening. I want to make sure that everyone just gives an opportunity to just give a little prayer, a wish, a comment in the comment section as we close tonight. And Dzvinka, I want to give the last 1 minute to you. Give us a blessing, give us a thought, give us something that will close tonight's webinar.
I would call everybody to support the humanitarian aid to Ukraine. We know how desperate Ukrainians are for helmets, bulletproof vests, because at the moment every civilian is in danger, and there is massive lack of first aid kits, of medicine for people of Ukraine. People are dying because of Russian military aggression. And I call all of you to support Ukrainian Association of South Africa that I represent today. Also takes donations. We are trying to arrange helmets and bulletproof vests, as well as first aid kits to all civilians in Ukraine.
Dzvinka, how in fact can we make a donation to the Ukrainian Society?
There is a webpage, www.uaza.co.za, and there is a donation button. I can happily share also with all of you the further information.
Please, if I could ask you to post that onto the chat, and we'll also move it across to YouTube and Facebook as well. I'm sure there are a lot of people tonight who would love to be able to help with protective gear, with first aid kits, and do what we can in order to help all the people of Ukraine at this terrible time of enormous need. So thank you for joining us this evening. Really thank you to all the thousands of people who've watched us this evening. We've been going now, I think we started this 2.5 hours ago, maybe a little more, but our audience has remained. And for someone to remain for 2.5 hours on a webinar in this day and age is absolutely, absolutely astounding. So thank you to everyone. We're going to leave the chat on for the next 5 minutes. We're going to tell everyone to turn off their cameras, but thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon, and our prayers are with you all. Good night.